This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate second and final part of What If Naruto Frees Jellal from prison. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
Naruto muttered, "Can't they, dispel the barrier?" "Yes, they can," Jellal replied, "but they wouldn't dare, at least, not yet. It would leave us free to attack." "It's a good thing we've got Jellal on our side," Kyo told him. When word reached us of the public execution, he realized immediately that it was a plan to lure all your accomplices out. "We would have come earlier too," Jellal admitted, "but we only found out about your execution yesterday. I never expected the council to take such a decision without even holding a trial for." Grand Doma cautioned, "Do you three understand me?" They were now the target of numerous Jupiter cannons positioned throughout the headquarters, with the words, "If you do not surrender at my word." Naruto looked around and said, "Hey, wait a minute, where's Samui?" he asked. Kyo merely gestured upward and said, "You'll see." The execution platform was rocked by a series of beautiful explosions as soon as he finished the section with the runic barrier detached and fell freely toward the earth, but before it could drop any lower, three enormous hooks descended from the sky, grabbing hold of the concrete slab where the three men were standing above the ground. Someone called out, "Are you all right, over there?" The knights exclaimed, "Dragon!" in fear. When Naruto looked up, he saw what appeared to be three enormous clay dragons. The knights were correct, of course. With a chain hanging from each of their bellies on two of them, he saw Samui and Merity riding astride, but on the biggest one, he was standing and smiling maniacally. "Art is an explosion, It was actually Deidara who notified us," Jellal admitted. "He located Samui, who only just managed to round the rest of us up yesterday." Naruto shuddered. "Oh, Samui, she was going to kill him." At the same time, a knightly counselor had started yelling commands at the soldiers who had regained their balance. He shouted, "Shoot them down, and don't let them get away." The Jupiter cannons were aimed at the pilots, but the massive cannons trembled and then fell to dust before any of them could fire. Naruto arched an eyebrow. Jellal said, "She's overdoing it again," as nearly half of the freshly constructed headquarters collapsed once more. "There's no way she's gonna escape with only a mild arrest warrant this time." Naruto thought he heard a woman laughing hysterically somewhere in the distance. He questioned, "Is she going to be okay?" With a gloomy expression on his face, Jellal growled, "Yeah, it's Ultier. She can get out of there on her own." Naruto sighed and put his eyes down, saying, "Oh, okay. I'm sorry to hear that you two haven't quite moved on from your lover's argument yet." Jellal spat something, but Naruto ignored him and looked at the magic chairman, who remained motionless in the face of the mayhem at any time. The chairman could have taken action. He had the ability to call forth his magic. He could have just blown the barrier away for reasons best known to him. It appeared that the chairman was mainly unconcerned with the blonde's escape strategy. Naruto was frightened by the idea. Naruto stared at Grand Doma's face until it finally vanished into the distance and he was left with nothing left to see. Samui had slapped him across the cheek as soon as they had stepped out of the cave. Difficult to see if she had knocked a tooth loose, Naruto clucked his tongue, but he gave up when she stared at him icily. Why? It sounded like a twisted threat. She was looking for an answer, and Naruto knew what she needed to know. He knew exactly she was indifferent to his devastation of the cathedral, his council arrest, or even his near execution. All she needed to know was why he had chosen to keep them in the dark, the reasons behind his need to go it alone. He thus revealed everything to her, Kyo, and, regrettably, Jellal as well. These people, at least two of them, needed to know, but he kept the others out of earshot. He quickly explained to them the trap and the masked man, who was undoubtedly the cause of Jiraiya's disappearance. He talked about their fight, the peculiar R system, and how his opponent appeared to have no magical abilities at all. Naturally, he also omitted a few things. He was still unsure of the specifics of what had happened to his mother's necklace or why the man had been so determined to catch him, but he had given them the essential information anyhow because he thought it would benefit them to know as little as possible. With serious brown eyes, Kyo muttered, "So this man? This number one, he is unaffected by magic?" he asked. Naruto nodded and said, "At least, conventional magic. And you couldn't manage to figure out his identity, or the reason he attacked you or Jiraiya?" Naruto gave a headshake. Kyo let out a low whistle and sighed. "Well, this is fucked up." He started pacing the cave restlessly. With a shrug, Naruto looked at the man with the blue hair among them with a slight smile. He said, "So, I'm guessing we are truly even now, right?" With a smile, Jellal replied, "I guess so." They watched from across the room as Deidara showed off his explosive artwork to a delighted Merity. With uncharacteristically noticeable lines of worry on her face, Samui turned to face him and asked, "So, what are we going to do now, Naruto-sama?" After what happened today, we can't exactly return to our normal lives anymore. Where do we go from here? Naruto started. Stumbling, he collapsed on one side of the cave, clutching his head in contemplation as a sudden feeling of exhaustion overcame him. He had been frantically looking for information about his missing teacher for months. Anything now he knew the details of Jiraiya's disappearance. Regretfully, it also raised a number of additional queries. Was Jiraiya really dead, or was he just being imprisoned somewhere? This man in a mask. Who was he? Where was his operational base? Was he a member of a dark guild? Why did he find the two-toed sages so fascinating? What on earth was he hoping to accomplish? Frustrated, Naruto slammed the side of his fist against the cave wall. Yes, he needed answers. He was relieved to have an angle to work with for the time being, but there were still a lot of factors he needed to figure out. He would come to his aid if Jiraiya was out there. Easy, it had nothing more to it. Samui had been correct, though what about now? Now, what do they do? He thought having a viable manhunt on their heads made it impossible for them to continue roaming. Kylum Kingdom was also out of the question. He had to stay in fury if he was going to find the man in the mask before the stray tear could escape his eye. He squished it, but what was there for him to do? What was it that he could do on his own? Naruto and his godfather had been searching the world since he was 10 years old in order to train to become a mage. He had only ever known life with the white-haired recluse because he had always thought he would eventually locate the elder sage. He had continued to move forward during Jiraiya's disappearance. He may never see Jiraiya again after everything, because he has now reached a dead end. After hearing the sage mutter something, Kyo interrupted. What did you say, Naruto-sama? Naruto lowered his head. What would the pervy sage have wanted me to do? He asked. In a situation like this, what would he have suggested? Kyo and Samui looked at each other warily. Well, the youngster said nervously, Jiraiya-sama had let slip once or twice that he wanted you to join a guild once you were done with your training. He thought that relating with other people apart from the two of us might do some good for you. Guild, huh? Naruto turned the word over in his mind. The word didn't sound familiar to him. In all honesty, he had considered the idea several times in the past, but the idea of a guild brought together alien ideas like friendship, family, bonds, and trials, and Naruto wasn't sure he could go through all of that with more than the two people he saw in front of him. But which legal guild will take wanted men? He murmured, unless you want us to go join a dark one? Dark guild, huh? Kyo laughed. Well, it won't be the first time I've been part of one before. The question, what about you, Jellal, crossed Naruto's mind. The blonde replied, I've already decided on my path. There was something that always bothered me during my imprisonment at the Black. I want to find out the true fate of the missing members of Fairy Tail, and I'm going to make sure that no one will ever find the need to hunt Zeref again and use his powers for themselves. Naruto nodded and said, well, I suppose that just leaves me. He proceeded to the cave's entrance and observed Ultir riding on the crest of the lowering sun on another of Deidre's clay dragons. When she saw him, she waved enthusiastically, and he waved back, grinning. He had a scheme. After 3 days, Kyo yawned and walked with Samui to the meeting spot that their leader had previously assigned them. What do you think the boss called us here for? Kyo asked. Even though it was only around 8 in the morning, some of the town's residents had already made their way to the beer houses, so Wisteria Town was, well, exactly as Wisteria Town should be. Samui kept the hood of her cloak low over her face and muttered, I don't know. She had packed the most valuable of her few belongings in a small box that was pulled behind her. Given her knowledge of Samui, it was most likely a stack of books. Kyo had made no effort to pack. He had just put his hands in the pockets of his pants and started walking down the streets, whistling a cheerful melody. Their motley crew of outcasts had finally parted ways. 3 days prior, Ultir had offered to accompany Jellal on his self-imposed quest out of guilt. The three of them, including Mary, had made their way to the ruins of Tenro Island. The sultry brunette had stolen a council ship to get there, or, as she put it, confiscated. Meanwhile, Naruto had essentially disappeared, telling his two friends to meet him at his predetermined location later. This time, Kyo and Samui didn't even bother to object because they didn't know what their leader was up to. Neither had much of a life left to return to, and even if they did, they couldn't. As usual, they would have to comply with whatever ill-conceived scheme Naruto had devised. They had just reached the tiny alley that Naruto had mentioned, which was located in a rather isolated area of the city, when they encountered a face they hadn't particularly anticipated seeing. The newcomer yelled, "Watch where you're going, as he collided with them. Samui was so shocked that her eyes nearly burst out of her head. She screamed, "What the hell are you doing here?" Instead of showing signs of weakness, the former detention corps captain scowled at her while puffing on his bang. "I can ask you the same thing too, sis." Samui connected the dots. She growled, "Don't tell me, Naruto-sama invited you as well?" "Well, Deidara said, sniffing the air. Well, what? The girl yelled. With a raised eyebrow, the blonde man said, you just said I shouldn't tell you. Kyo intervened between the two of them before Samui could do something grotesque to the man, such as skewer him with the dagger she concealed up her sleeve. Now, he said, as if he were reprimanding two 2-year-olds, that's no way to say hello. Especially not between brother and sister. He's not my brother, snarled Samui. Either way, Kyo yawned and dismissively waved her away. We better go see what the boss wants. It's about the time he said we should meet. When they came out into the light after crossing the alley, Naruto saw them and started waving at them enthusiastically from the other side of the street. He was wearing a somewhat different outfit, keeping his orange knickers and black shirt, along with his customary clogs and wrist beads. His cloak, which was still red but had a new design, was the only thing that had changed. It was longer than the previous one, and featured intricate fire motifs that were reminiscent of his father's along the length of the sleeves and tail ends. But the most noticeable structure behind him was a massive, ungainly-looking 2-story structure. Slanted and crooked at angles that made one wonder how in the world the entire structure managed to survive. The building was an architectural nightmare. The walls were paneled, bleached red, and appeared to be composed of a blend of hot-baked clay and teak on top of a dome-shaped roof with two somewhat horn-like projections on either side. A stone chimney roared smoke. The whole thing looked like a mushroom. Samui was about to inquire about the nature of the entity when a stray flyer blocked her view. Huh? She pulled the piece of paper away from her face and squinted at the words, which were written with childish crayons in a rather animated manner. To add stool GUILD, she said, application form. New mages needed requirements. Mages must be POW or full. What is this? She asked, raising an eyebrow at their esteemed leader with an inquisitive expression. Oh. That must be from some of the flyers I distributed today. I pasted it all over town. Naruto exclaimed, clapping his hands and grinning ecstatically. Kyo asked, pasted what exactly? The blonde's smile grew, and he gestured to the building behind him. At that moment, they saw the big signboard hammered on top of the single double doors. Toadstool? Yeah, Naruto replied. You said that the pervy sage had always wanted me to join a guild, right? So I ran through a list of available guilds, and couldn't find any that I would be willing to work with. Therefore, I took on a disguise, went to the Cabinet of Magic Affairs and decided to register my own guild. Oh, I see, Kyo said, giving a wise nod. Wait, what? He said after pausing. So, you mean to tell me that you formed your own guild, Naruto-sama? Samui said. Kyo finished, and built that structure in less than 3 days? Yeah. Why? The wise toad nodded. I knew you were spontaneous, Naruto-sama, but I never figured you could actually go this far, Samui said, pinching the bridge of her nose angrily. What do you mean? The woman exhaled. Do you know exactly what you've done, Naruto? Did you even think for a moment what this could cause? Here we are, supposed to be maintaining a low profile, and here you are doing something as rash as creating a guild. We'd attract lots of trouble. We'd get hunted down by the council and half of all the legal guilds. We'd never be able to sleep peacefully, and I'm pretty sure that some of us will get hurt in the process. It appeared that Naruto was surprised when she said, so, you wouldn't join? Samui spat, of course, I'd join. If you can't even take 2 steps without stepping into a dung heap of trouble, I shudder to think what you'd do without us. She smiled slightly and said, plus, I guess it would be pretty cool. Being in a guild once again, huh? Yeah, I guess I can work with that if nothing else. It should be hilarious watching you run it, boss, Kyo said with a smile as she turned to stand beside them. Naruto sniffed, crying, guys, what the hell did you think, boss? Kyo gasped, pretending to be hurt. You thought we were actually gonna abandon you? My heart, it's broken to pieces. With a smile, Naruto turned to face the final person in their small group. Deidara stood a distance away, staring at the sun in the morning. You're welcome to join, you know, he said, it might not be anything like your former job but I'm sure it would keep you occupied. The blonde with the long hair didn't seem totally convinced. Besides, Naruto said quietly, you would get the opportunity to practice your skills, and earn steady cash which you'd need to in order purchase more of your art materials. The former captain appeared to be won over by that. He grunted and marched directly into the building, saying, well, what are you waiting for? Count me in. Judging from what I've seen in the past week, this place is bound to be a riot, ha ha. As Kyo and a less enthusiastic Samui also moved forward to investigate the building, Naruto grinned back and stepped aside. He paused and looked up at the heavens. There were numerous guilds in the nation, but a new one had been established in a particular town, a guild from which legends have not yet emerged but will do so in the near future. Toadstool was the name of that guild, and he sensed his teacher keeping watch over it. Today's Wisteria Town. Greetings from Wisteria Town, the alcoholic capital of Fury. As you are undoubtedly aware, the locals are cheerful, industrious, and rarely refuse a good beer. Nevertheless, they enjoyed local rumors even more than alcohol, which is why there was a noticeable buzz in the town today. Did you hear? Wisteria Town now has its very own magic guild? Really? You're kidding, aren't you? I'm not. I saw the posters around town just the other day. Finally, something interesting is happening around this place. But who would possibly want to set up a guild here? Surely, no guild master in his right senses would think to do so. I doubt a mage has even stepped foot in this town in decades. There's that Uzumaki boy. Oh, you mean Naruto? Yeah, right. Like anybody actually believes that story he cooked up? It said on the poster that the new guild is currently searching for mages. I think I have a pretty good shot. Ha ha, don't be hilarious, Wes. You wouldn't know what magic was even if it leapt up and bit you on the nose. Ow. It was easy to overlook the hooded stranger who slipped into the Golden Swan beerhouse and approached its plump bartender because the center of activity was entertaining as usual. Without moving his lips, Inari said, "Morning, Naruto-san." "Good morning," the hooded man said with a smile. "Has my order arrived yet?" "Yes, Naruto-san, I had them rolled up and delivered directly to your house." "Oh, is that so? Well, thanks then, Nai, you're a lifesaver." As the man gave him a firm back pat and left the establishment, Inari shrugged. He wasn't sure if he should even be curious about what the quirky blonde intended to do with so much alcohol. Naruto exclaimed, finally, as he stepped back from the counter to admire his creation. Freshly purchased wine bottles and barrels were neatly lined up behind a glass display, and the bar behind the counter had just been finished. He wiped his brow, grinned to himself, and surveyed his freshly polished guild hall with approval. However, his eyes fell when he saw his companions idly hanging around. He yelled, "Thanks for nothing, you guys." Kyo yawned, barely hearing what was said. "You're welcome." Samui, still wearing two towels, one wrapped around her torso and the other frantically wiping at her hair, drew lead from her position by the large fireplace and said, "The pipes in the third room on the second floor need fixing, Naruto-sama. And the door on the room next to that one has come unhinged." "Well, what did you expect?" said Naruto. "Those rooms were meant for paying tenants. You slackers moved into them without giving me a single dime." With icy eyes, Samui asked, "Did you say something, Naruto?" The toad sage sighed and went back to examining the bar. No, not really. Now he didn't need to put up with Samui when she was being grumpy. With an old copy of the Sorcerer Weekly magazine in his hands, Kyo continued to lounge on his preferred sofa and asked, "How do you expect us to pay for them anyway? I'm broke. Samui's broke. We're all broke. Plus there's nothing to do around here." In that moment, Naruto concluded that his decision to furnish the guild hall with opulent pieces instead of the customary wooden table and bench was unquestionably the worst one he had ever made. Now, it would be impossible to get them off their asses. With a gesture around the complex, Samui continued, on another note, asking, "How did you even get the money to acquire all this, Naruto? We could never afford such expenses before." Bank loan?" Naruto asked, a shiver of anxiety running down his back. He was not going to tell them about the fortune Jiraiya had left him in case something bad happened. They would definitely take advantage of him even more than they usually did if they discovered that he was now worth 1,000,000,000 jewels. Samui squinted at his response, but fortunately she chose not to press the issue. Deidara interrupted, pointing out that Naruto was also in the room, and said, "You know, the mummy over there actually has a point. How do you aim to keep the guild running if you don't get any mission requests?" Deidara asked. Naruto angrily said, "I'll come up with something. We just need to sign more members first." "And how do you intend we do that? How do you intend to market the brand? Do you even have a business plan yet? You know, goals, strengths, weaknesses, guidelines, that sort of stuff?" Without even looking up from a well-worn page that featured his favorite swimsuit, Kyo chuckled and said, "Wow. For someone who is only interested in blowing stuff up, you seem actually pretty well versed." Shrugging, Deidara said, "It comes with the job description. Maybe we can do a bonanza? First 20 customers get mission requests completed free of charge?" Naruto asked, scowling and biting his lip thoughtfully. "Well, what do you want me to do?" For a moment, the group was lost in thought. Finally, they all said, "Nah," together. "You're right, that wouldn't work," Naruto said with a grumble. "How about this? I'll draw up flyers promoting the guild with the words, 'Toadstool, any task you can't handle, we'll get it done in a jiffy.'" Samui asked disgustingly, "Does that include babysitting and doing dishes?" Kyo turned green and muttered, "Or changing diapers." As long as it is in the best interests of the guild, we just have to go along with it. I'd say it's decided. I draw up the posters and distribute them today. Naruto smirked, enjoying the thought of finally putting them to work. We have to make sacrifices, won't we? He asked, taking 3 saucers out from under the bar. Anybody up for a drink? He asked. The 3 guild members eagerly put up their hands. You'd have to pay for it, though, they complained and went back to their chairs. 6 days ago, council headquarters, with the memories of what he had just witnessed still fresh in his mind, Lahar moved quickly. He still had a lot of paperwork to finish regarding the Yoshino mess, and to his utter dismay, he discovered that things were also not going well in the magic capital. The mini Etherion and the recently renovated council secretariat were destroyed when the criminal, Naruto Uzumaki, managed to avoid execution. The bespectacled knight was called to a meeting of the squad captains, which hadn't really been on his schedule, after an exhausting hour of supervising the reconstruction process and performing any necessary damage control. From the perspective of the magical world, the captains of the detention corps were a fairly well-known group. They were the leaders in the struggle for justice and the council's messengers. But despite their well-known status, it was no secret that they all actually had a bad working relationship. Squad captains were supposed to perform a variety of duties for the Magic Council, and they might not even come into contact with one another for years. Lahar was therefore taken aback when one of the council's scribes took him to the deserted hall that had been quickly transformed for the current meeting. It was Doranbolt who first saw him enter the room. Lahar, thank goodness, you're all right. The man with the bespectacles scowled. He had obviously already failed at Yoshino before he arrived. Receiving a beating down was the most humiliating thing that could happen, but it was even worse when you had to use an explicit council measure to get out of it alive. A portion of his mind went back to that terrible place, and his balance faltered to believe that the council would genuinely accept such heinousness. It's good to see you again, he said with a friendly, Doranbolt. The scarred man crossed his arms in his chair and sighed. Well, that's one way to look at it, especially after everything that has happened this past week. With a nod, Lahar looked at the other captains gathered around the room's lone table. The group's size fluctuated throughout history. At one point, during the Cabria War, they even made up the entire score, but now that magic guilds had recently gained popularity again and military work had lost its luster, things had changed. Even though there were only 6 captains working for the council anymore, it was still more than the total number of highly qualified mages employed by the Rune Knights. Only 4 of these individuals were present in the room at the moment. Captain of the first unit, Shino Aburame, initiated the meeting. He was the most stoic of them, a young man with dark shades and bushy hair. A woman with green hair named Captain of the third, Pakura, trailed behind. Her 2 orange bangs that framed both sides of her face were her most noticeable features. Lahar winced, recalling the last time a naive intern had inquired about the color of her hair or bangs. Since then, the man's appearance had changed. He dutifully announced his position, 4th Unit Captain, Lahar, before Doranbolt finally hung up. Pakura scowled, as if disappointed by the attendance. Her brown eyes looked around the room without feeling anything. As expected, the 6th Unit Captain is unavailable pertaining to his duties at headquarters, but is there any feasible reason why the 2nd is not here? Doranbolt laughed, knowing him. He's probably off somewhere on another glamorous search for youth. Pakura snarled and took on her silent role as the squad captain's leader, saying, Then I guess we will have to begin without him. These are the targets, she said, pointing to the lacrima crystal in the middle of the table and calling forth a series of pictures to appear on it. I am sure we all know of the escaped convict, Jellal Fernandez, but he is not our main priority right now. The other one though. There's no point in that, Doranbolt said. I doubt there's anyone in all of Fury who isn't aware of him by now. Pakura continued. The other one is target Naruto Uzumaki. He has been declared a national threat by the Magic Council right now. A nationwide manhunt has been ordered for his head, of which I have been put in command of. What level? Lahar inquired as he calmly studied the picture of the blonde man who bore an eerie resemblance to his mentor. Glancing at him, Pakura said, a triple S-class threat. There haven't been any triple S-class threats in Fury since the Great Wars, Lahar exclaimed, startled. Pakura scowled and said, my point exactly. You faced the man, Lahar. What is he like? Lahar tightened his hold on the table's edges and went silent for a moment. How did Naruto Uzumaki behave? He is a monster, he ultimately conceded. He's the son of Minato Taiko and a student of Jiraiya-sama, so what would you expect? However, he reflected on what had happened just a week prior. He isn't vile like Brain of the Oracion Cease or Hades of Grimoire Heart. He doesn't give off that signature malevolent aura you come to expect with most villains. He almost seems, he had trouble determining what to say, mellow, At least, not enough to justify the level of a triple S class. This man attacked an impenetrable facility, took out the prison court mages in one hit, released 2 high-level dangerous criminals, and later attempted to activate an R system right in the middle of Era. Pakura said sternly, "Tell me again how that doesn't justify a triple S class." Lahar said, not liking her tone, "I don't know, you asked me to tell what he was like and I just did that." "What about his magic?" Doranbolt asked. "The council never mentioned anything about it, but I heard he uses fire magic of some sort." "Not just fire," Lahar muttered, still experiencing the phantom pains of third-degree burns, which were fortunately treatable by the council's healers. "He also makes use of earth." "You can't be serious, you mean he's skilled enough to use multiple elemental forms combat-wise?" Doranbolt asked, raising an eyebrow. "The target is a toad sage." Pakura thought. If his magic is anything like Jiraiya's, then it should be expected that he has mastered multiple elemental forms. Toad magic is a lost sage-type magic that specializes in fire, mud and oil. From what I've heard, add that to his supposed mastery of other miscellaneous sage skills and we might actually have a problem on our hands. There was a long period of quiet, broken only by the buzzing that came from inside Shino's uniform. "The thing is," Doranbolt finally said, "truthfully speaking, I doubt the Rune Knights have the power to deal with this kind of enemy. If he was put on such a high threat level, why not just send the Wizard War Saints after him or one of the other Gwei?" "No." Lahar fidgeted and fiddled with the reams of his sleeves as the other people reacted in shock at the outburst. "I'm just saying," he murmured, "that the War Saints are a last resort for a good reason. I have seen them at work. This man has not warranted such measures yet. No one ever should," in his opinion, with her eyebrows raised in disgust. Pakura gave him a suspicious look before saying, "Whether or not you think he has shouldn't be any concern of yours. That would remain a decision for the council. They have seen fit to place him in our charge for now." The Lacrima's image changed to show a map of Fury. Lahar saw that they had also highlighted the positions of some of their garrisons. "As we speak, a fleet of ships are already prepared to mobilize at our any command. Our units have also been positioned at various stress points, ready to pick up arms at any moment." "Do we already have his location?" Lahar asked, appearing taken aback. "No, but someone is working on deducing that for us." Pakura turned to face the final person in the room and asked, "Shino?" with a cunning smile. Shino's second response since the start of the meeting was, "There is more than a small difference between working on doing a task and actually doing that task." He was looking absently at a bug that was perched on the tip of his index finger, as though he were speaking to it. Which, given his knowledge of Shino, he most likely was. With a quiet laugh, Pakura said, "Shino currently tracks the whereabouts of Uzumaki. I slipped my insect unto him during his infamous incarceration." The lover of bugs continued as though he hadn't heard any of it. "Grand Doma-sama must have evidently foreseen his escape. As long as he doesn't leave Fury, I'd still be able to trace him right now. My relay bug is currently trying to process the signals being sent in. Would it take some time?" "Yes, but would I deliver his coordinates to you?" "That, I can guarantee." "Then it is settled," Pakura said. "Once the coordinates come in, the captains of the 1st, 3rd and 5th divisions are responsible for bringing this man in." Doranbolt frowned thoughtfully and said, "We'd need a plan. A criminal like this, we can't just attack him head-on, plus I'm coming along too." Doranbolt looked at his friend and perked up, saying, "We can't leave the headquarters undefended. Someone would need to stay behind in order to respond to other threats." "I'm coming along." "Naruto, no. Uzumaki is teacher's son. I can't just sit back and allow him to keep soiling the name of the man who trained me," Lahar said firmly, his shoulders shaking with fear. "What are you talking about, Lahar?" Doranbolt replied, "Namikaze-sama trained me too. It doesn't mean I get to act recklessly." "This is dumb," Pakura said coldly. "As the leader of this operation, I will not allow you to jeopardize its undertaking simply because of your personal ties to it." "You would need my help," Lahar yelled uncharacteristically. "I've faced the man before. At least 2 of us would be needed to take him down. And then what about his accomplices? Have you forgotten about them? He's been spotted in the company of 3 renowned criminals, Deidara, Ultir and Jellal. What would you do if all 4 were together? Even the might of 3 units of Rune Knights wouldn't be enough to take them all on." "You underestimate the power of the Knights, Captain Lahar. You are not the only Rune Master under service." With her eyes narrowing to slits, Pakura growled, "If we find Deidara, I will take him on myself." Turning to face the others in the room, she said, "Get ready. We'd leave on my signal. In the meantime, Doranbolt, I'd like you to re-establish contact with the 2nd Division captain. We could use him." The man nodded and watched his friend, who was now sitting motionless with his fists clenched around the table's edges. "Got it," he said. He concluded that there was a problem with Lahar. Normally, the man didn't speak out of turn. Something had changed in his friend, though he was unable to identify it precisely. What precisely did Lahar perceive in Yoshino, today's Wisteria town? When the first client entered the guild, a refined, straight-nosed woman wearing an amazing dress and hat, the sun had already risen high in the sky. Naruto was waiting for anyone to arrive at his workstation as scheduled. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said with a disarming smile. "How may we be of service?" With a thick nasal voice, she questioned, "Is these zigi oiled called toadstool?" From his seat on the couch, Kyo snorted, "No, it's the one called pig stew, but I'm pretty sure we had a signboard out front anyway." "Yes, it is. Madam, how may we be of service?" Naruto scowled at the sarcastic comment but chose to ignore his disobedient subordinate for the time being. "Jihad, I was visiting from out of town when I saw your poster," she held it up. "Any task you can't handle, we'll get it done in a jive." With a nod, Naruto said, "Yes, that would be ours. Since I would be busy for the rest of the day, I was hoping you could help me walk my dogs?" Samui whispered, "How is that a task you can't handle?" Naruto grinned and said, "Of course, ma'am, we'll get on it right away, Kyo." "What?" the man stutteringly said. "Since you love to run your mouth anyway, why don't you be a dear and help our client walk her dogs? The request is free, by the way, madam." The woman said, "Oh, thank you, kind sir." Kyo started to say, "Hey, I'm not," but Naruto's eyes narrowed and a shadow covered his face. "Get on it now," he snarled. After complaining for a while, Kyo finally followed the woman out of the guild. After they left, Naruto smiled and opened a logbook, writing, "We've gotten our first customer ever." "A bit banal for a first job," Samui said, arching an indifferent eyebrow. "Why didn't you charge her?" he asked. Naruto shrugged and said, "She's our first customer, I thought it would be nice." "You're too easily stimulated, Naruto-sama." When she said that, the blonde blinked. In less than a minute, another client entered the guild, this time a farmer wearing a straw hat and trademark vest, suggesting that Naruto's new approach had been successful. After taking down the request, Naruto hardly had time to put down his pen before another one entered. "Hey, isn't that Uzumaki-san?" "Whoa, so the rumors were true, you really are a mage, Naruto." "Annabelle misses you, you know, aren't you going to ask for her hand in marriage again?" It appeared that the majority of Wisteria's citizens were only there to satisfy their curiosity about the recently formed guild. Many of them were aware of Naruto and ultimately made one or two requests to support the guild. The blonde mentioned earlier moaned and held his head in both hands after a while. "I think I finally understood what the pervy sage meant when he advised that you should never let your past catch up to you," even though he probably meant that more in the context of the feminine sex than anything else. He thought to himself, maybe I shouldn't have started a guild in a town that I was already familiar in. Sitting across from him on a bar stool, Samui sighed and said, "You're only just realizing this? What's really got me bothered is that, at this rate, the council's going to get wind of our activities and put a stop to it soon. You worry too much, Samui-chan. You know, if you wouldn't mind stopping by my place later on, there's this nifty little trick I can use to help." "Why?" Naruto said, groaning once more before adopting a cunning expression upon seeing the ideal mounds of cleavage blocking his view. "If you so much as complete that statement, Naruto-sama, you'd end up finding a certain piece of your anatomy dangling out front as the new sign of our guild." With his hands instinctively moving to his nether areas, the sage squeaked, "Hey, I was only offering to give you a massage." With a gleam in his blue eyes, Samui said, "My point, exactly. That's what I call a good whipping." Deidara guffawed, pouring himself a drink of sake from a tiny bottle he held in his hand. "Samui-chan, you haven't changed at all." The woman hissed, "Shut up, what's the deal between you two anyway?" Naruto asked, glancing between them before leaning in to whisper conspiratorially with Samui. "Is he really your brother like he says?" he asked, nudging his head at Deidara. With a distressed expression, Samui said, "I have no relation to that man." Deidara called out, "Ouch, I heard that." After giving him a wary look, Naruto turned to face Samui, but his eyes widened in surprise, and he abruptly turned to face the other man. "Where did you get that from?" he yelled. "Say what?" inquired Deidara. As the man took another sip of his favorite wine, Naruto snarled, "The sake, how did you get that?" he asked. From the bar, I think." "You stole it?" "No," Deidara said, gesturing to the irate sage with his finger, "I took it." The whiskers on Naruto's cheeks became slightly more savage as he sneered, "You don't get to drink unless you've paid for it." "Hey, man, I've been in the freezer for years. Where exactly do you expect me to get the money to foot my bills from?" "Well, you can start from here," the guild master said with a cunning expression. He then gave the other blonde a list of chores and said, I'm sure these will keep you busy enough you can pay for the drink when you're done. After glancing at the list, Deidara blurted out, weeding a farm and finding some woman's cat? You underestimate the relevance of my art. I think it wasn't meant for any of this. Naruto growled, in the meantime, get to work, and gave Samui a similar list, saying, this is yours. Well, maybe, when you raise enough money, you can go start a gallery and practice whatever stupid nonsense your art was meant for. With a raised eyebrow, the bootylicious blonde read it and said, I notice with some dismay that you're not participating in any of this, Naruto-sama. Naruto shrugged and grabbed a clean glass to start wiping it down. I drew up the posters, he said. I also distributed them besides. Don't you think it would be bad business for a guild if the guild master actually went around fulfilling requests for its members? Deidara piped, I don't remember swearing you in. Who made you guild master? Oh yeah, if you run into Kyo, can you give this to him? Said Naruto. Ignoring him, he gave the girl another set of assignments. And do you know what? His face turned gloomy. To make your tasks even more interesting, why don't we have a game? Whoever comes in last place between you two would have to answer to me, and carry out cleaning duties for the whole of next month. Samui scowled and said, you're kidding. Yes, Naruto sighed mockingly, but it's not, so you had better get on it in the interim. If my name was Billy and I loved continuous tenses, but it's not. As she was about to vent further, the woman realized that Deidara had vanished from view. It seems that somebody already gets the message. Naruto giggled. I can only imagine what cleaning this whole place is going to feel like. Samui yelled angrily, Naruto-sama, as she leapt off her stool and ran out of the hallway. The blonde called after her and said, hey, make sure to get that list to Kyo as soon as possible. It should be the first thing you do. As he watched her sprint through the streets, he grinned. Indeed, managing a guild was proving to be the most enjoyable experience he had had in a long time. Commander Pakura. We are steadily approaching target. Contact is approximated to be in 2 hours. Requesting permission to establish contact with the nearest garrison, sir. Pakura sighed and pulled on the reins in her fist to stop the war beast she was riding. Permission granted. We make camp here, men, she yelled. Take 15 minutes to pull yourselves into order. Her soldiers appeared more than happy to comply, and before long, each of them had gotten off their horse to relieve the weariness brought on by the lengthy ride. Shino? Pakura called as she skillfully dismounted and walked over to her other coworker. With his shades reflecting a faint image of the insect perched on his finger, the bug user remained on his war beast. With a slight frown on her face, she told him, if we keep going in this direction, we will eventually break out into the border mountains. Those mountains cast an unusually menacing shadow over the landscape, likely because of their role during the events of the Cabria War, and Fiore's relations with Kylum were at best tenuous. Are you sure we are on the right track? Which is the nearest town from here? Shino asked stiffly, barely acknowledging her. Considering our present bearing, I'd say Wisteria is, Pakura said, her lips curving in contemplation. Then that's where we're headed. Satisfied with his conclusion, the woman nodded. She could collaborate with Shino the best out of all her different co-workers after having him work under her division for years. Prior to his promotion, of course. She could now say that she was extremely confident in his extraordinary tracking abilities. The man was clear, concise, and extremely efficient. I fail to see how you think a squad this small could be anywhere near effective. However, she wasn't entirely certain about Dorenbolt. She was fairly certain that neither of them had been able to meet the high standards the council had set for them, even though the man and Lahar had once been the exalted followers of the Yellow Flash. Additionally, Dorenbolt was a bit of a loose cannon. She was aware of his failure to alert the council to the actions of the polytriad of Grimoire Heart, Fairy Tail, and Zareth during the Tenro Island mission. She grinned as she turned to face the man and thought, not that the way the whole incident later turned out was a bad thing. Grimoire Heart had been destroyed by Fairy Tail, and Zareth had since destroyed them, reducing their cherished island to a crater in the ocean floor. She remembered with anxiety that the only issue was that they were still unsure of Zareth's location. That was the foundation of a catastrophe in and of itself. A larger squad will draw attention to ourselves and make it more difficult for the men to carry out battle plans, she replied easily. These are the best soldiers in the Rune Knights. They've been trained for purposes such as this. Dorenbolt cast a contemplative glance around the group. There was no question about it. Even for him, these soldiers were the best in each of their 3 divisions. Lahar is the most proficient rune master in the Knights as of now, he said defensively, and he learned everything he knows from the best. Pakura answered, there are other great rune masters in the army. But he is the best, Dorenbolt continued, considering the opposition we might face. I won't deny that, despite your logic, we still could have used him. I would not let your friend jeopardize the mission. Bakura said, in fact, the only reasons I'm allowing you to participate in this right now is because, 1. It was ordered directly from the council, and 2. You've proven to be able to keep a cool head on occasions, which you're actually not doing right now. Who is it that's making her lose her composure? Dorenbolt thought, but they were quickly cut off before he could think of a suitable response. I would think that we would be better off making use of our time to draw up a plan to apprehend our target, rather than arguing uselessly amongst ourselves. Shino sighed, the distaste evident in his tone. Wisteria is a small inhabited town located just east of the mountains. How do we plan on waging war against Uzumaki and his accomplices without causing harm to the denizens around? Pakura let out a sigh as always. Shino was correct, they needed to stay focused on their priorities. I've thought of that, she admitted. If Uzumaki is alone, we might need to act swiftly in order to apprehend him. However, should the others be with him, we might be forced to perform a simple tactical recon and retreat. We can't afford to have casualties. However, it also begs the question, is Uzumaki sneaking around town? Or is he simply hiding in plain sight, under full protection of the people? We might need to speak with the mayor. Dorenbolt suggested. Wisteria is one of those unlucky towns which do not come under the direct protection of the Rune Knights, and still do not own a legal guild of their own. Our army is stretched thin, we cannot be everywhere at once. Pakura said, why not Crocus get their asses off the ground and actually do something for once? Before another dispute could start, Shino cut in again, saying, then it is settled, is it not? We'd send 2 emissaries ahead to speak with the mayor, then another group to act as scouts. The rest of us will camp around the city's main exit, ready to spring into action at any signal. Dorenbolt wondered, what would we do if it is just Naruto and Jellal? He was aware of his limitations. Their group would never be able to defeat 2 wizard saint level mages without suffering some sort of catastrophic loss. But Bakura just grinned and said, we'd take them both down. Council headquarters. Not specified. The organization was growing weary of these gatherings. He would develop pressure sores if he continued to sit in this chair. Bakura's squad had just reported that they had determined the criminal's probable location and were now focusing on it. The council had decided to call another meeting almost immediately, as is customary. In his high-pitched voice, Fiorello read from a report he had compiled that Wisteria is a rather unremarkable town. It's been fairly quiet for the past few years and there have been no notable occurrences in the area. Someone inquired, what is the city's given population? About 400 or thereabouts, maybe less. Do we not have a garrison in that area? Fiorello scowled disapprovingly and said, unfortunately, Master Gronkyar, although I believe that to be your responsibility, we do not. Chairman Sama, Dao said, now that we have his location, shouldn't we be taking more preemptive measures? Since the War Saints cannot be bothered, why don't we think of sending a larger army or one of the greater legal guilds? Org muttered under his beard, why don't you think of going yourself? Grand Doma responded, fortunately without hearing Org. That would be unnecessary. In addition, there are other urgent issues that also require our resources. Tell me, has Jiraiya been located yet? I have the utmost faith in Pakura's ability. It was Stino who raised her voice, straining, I'm afraid not, Chairman Sama. Grand Doma sighed, Jiraiya needs to be found. If anything, only he can take responsibility for the actions of his wayward student. When was he last sighted? The counselors looked at each other suspiciously. Grand Doma growled, Stino, and became agitated, forcing the woman to say something. Jiraiya's last contact with us was 2 years ago. He hasn't answered any of our summonses since. 2 years? Yes, however, our spies have informed us that about that same time, it had also been rumored that he had been active in the Kylum Kingdom, with his student, Naruto Uzumaki. Unaware of the news, Bosholt began, Kylum Kingdom? What could they have been doing in that blasted nation, except conniving with our enemy? That brings us to the next issue, Stino went on, because whatever Jiraiya and his student must have been doing in there greatly coincides with another matter that all too recently occurred, the assassination of the infamous leader of Kylum. There was a deathly silence in the council room. The implications of that statement even startled Org. For years, Kylum's leader had ruled the nation as a despotic dictator. Those with magic abilities were considered superior beings in a country where magic was essentially non-existent, and they frequently abused their position of authority. Although incredibly strong, Kylum's leader had been a typical example of this. After all, there was a reason why their 2 countries had never truly gotten along. All the chairman could say was, find Jiraiya, I want him and his student brought before me, and bring me more information on the matter. Org scowled. It appeared that Naruto Uzumaki's case was becoming more complicated by the day. Achoo, that's not fair, big bro. We're playing Toad Bomb, not Achoo. I'm sorry, someone must have been talking about me, Naruto said, scowling and rubbing his nose against his sleeve. He rolled his eyes at his toad summon at the moment. They were playing cards on top of the bar table. As you may not be aware, Jiraiya created the game Toad Bomb to help pass the time during his and his students' numerous journeys. However, it required a unique deck of cards that, with each bad hand, exploded in the user's face. No offense, big bro, said Gamakichi, but these days, if you actually sneezed every time someone brought your name up, I'm pretty sure you'd have blown off your nose by now. Alright, go fish, Naruto said with a shrug, turning back to the game. Oi, we're not playing that either. From the beginning, the mission had gone awry in the small town. Pakura had underestimated the audacity of their targets. A man who was simultaneously painting the bricks and walking a dog noticed the two emissaries, the ones dispatched to speak with the mayor, passing by a small fence. Oh, Kyo muttered as he dropped his paintbrush and ran away, leaving the poodle in his wake. One of the knights shouted after him, "Hey, halt!" As they pursued, the other said, "Alert, Captain Pakura. I recognize that man. I think he's one of them." When Pakura saw the flare go off, she was occupied overseeing defenses outside the town entrance. In a brief burst of red smoke, the signal had swept across the sky. She scowled and said, "That is, they've made contact already?" Doranbolt called, "I'm on it," and then disappeared in a blur. Pakura turned to her squad and yelled, "All units, get ready to move. I want a barrier activated around this area to prevent anyone from leaving town. Shino, can you get airborne?" The man with the bespectacles spread his arms wide and nodded. The atmosphere briefly experienced a surge of magical energy before he muttered, "Bug magic." Spiraling cloud. A huge number of dark-colored insects leapt into the air. After escaping from his sleeves, they quickly formed a thick cloud that started to move steadily into the town. Pakura smiled at the scene and said, "All right, let's go catch our criminal." The flare was not just noticed by the knights. Wisteria's residents had also noticed and were curious about what was wrong with their charming little town. With the trimming shears that should have been in her hands lying on the ground, Samui gazed up at the sky. She saw that as a council signal. "Naruto-sama," she said to the elderly woman sitting in a rocking chair next to her, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I'll have to leave now. I'll come finish the gardening tomorrow." Even as she was leaving, the woman called after her, "Take your time, dear." Kyo, in the meantime, was growing more and more irritated with his petty assailants. "Stop there. Halt right this minute." Kyo sneered and accelerated, saying, "Yeah, like that's going to happen." He made a quick turn, leapt over a low wall, and slipped through an alleyway while his assailants followed closely behind. After a brief period of silence, there were two loud thunks before the man with black hair walked out of the alley while wiping his palms. "Well, that took care of that," Kyo said with a grin, "although, I wonder what the knights are doing here in." The hair on the back of his neck stood on end, and instinct alone compelled him to sidestep the blow that would have struck his skull in agony. He got up and yelled, "Damn it, you bastard, what level of idiot attacks a man when he is not looking?" His assailant revealed himself. He had a distinctive scar on the left side of his face and was of a moderate height. Although Kyo was unable to identify him, the robe believed that the fact that he was wearing the robes of a high consulate official was sufficient. "Tell me," Doranbolt said, "are you familiar with the criminal, Naruto Uzumaki?" Kyo paused, looking up naively. "If I say no, does that mean you would leave me alone?" Wrong answer. Kyo had to jump back in reaction as the newcomer disappeared from view. The initial altercation was brief but extremely violent. His teleportation magic greatly enhanced his fighting style, and his attacker was effective in his blows. Even though Kyo was not a slacker when it came to hand-to-hand combat, Doranbolt's magic forced him to remain on the defensive, with each attempting deadly blows but only succeeding in delivering glancing blows to the other. After they were both frozen in place, Kyo gasped, "So this is the mighty flying thunder god magic I've heard much about." Doranbolt did not bother to correct the man. Even though his teacher's teleportation magic was far superior to his own, he was sufficiently impressed by the way the man had so far managed to hold his own given the ragged clothes and bandages. His opponent didn't appear to be much at first, but as soon as their altercation started, the robe transformed into a fighter. But he was still troubled by something else. "Are you so confident in your skills that you would aim to take me down without resorting to magic?" he inquired. "Pretty much," said Kyo. "Your magic ain't anything special. You know teleportation as a rule can only allow one propel himself in a straight line. You telegraph which direction you'd move before even doing so." Doranbolt nodded, impressed. "I see." The man hadn't wasted any time in figuring out his magic's real weakness. He had been searching for alternative methods to enhance his technique, though, ever since his stay on Tenro Island. Direct line. He yelled. Kyo was unprepared for the blow's speed, which sent him hurtling into a wall with neck-breaking reflexes. The man was able to straighten himself, but it was insufficient because Doranbolt was on him again. Kyo gritted his teeth and cried out, "Damn it!" As he was punched into yet another wall just as his opponent disappeared from view once more, he slammed a hand down on the concrete and a seal magically materialized on it. Direct line. Kusarigama. Doranbolt stopped just inches from the blade that would have cut his throat if he had gone any farther. "Oops," Kyo said with a smile while defensively encircling his body with the weapon's two-bladed ends. The knight captain looked at the blade that was tickling his Adam's apple and said, "You play dirty." That was a quick use of requip magic. Straight-faced, Kyo said, "Pardon me for not doing so earlier on, but I usually skip out on classes that train me how to lose correctly." "It doesn't matter," Doranbolt snarled in frustration. "You won't win here. You'd tell me where your partner is even if I have to beat it out of." "Not partner," Kyo cut in sharply, "Master. Guild Master." "Guild Master?" "Yep, of the Toadstool Guild." He made a casual flick of his wrist, but Doranbolt was fast enough to dodge the blade's slashing motion almost instantly. The other end was thrown at him, but the captain was still able to avoid it. Doranbolt shouted, "I warned you. If you wouldn't give in peacefully, then direct line." Mag X 100. With a flash, the teleporting mage disappeared, only to discover later that he had overextended his teleportation, crashing through 3 buildings before stopping abruptly on the 4th. He slid down the length of the wall and collapsed to the floor. Moaning, he remained motionless. "I apologize for that," Kyo said with a sheepish smile while scratching the back of his head as he walked over to the man who had fallen. "But if you've seen half of what I have, you'd quickly learn that there is no such thing as a fair fight." He observed that the man was unconscious and that blood was now streaming down one side of his scarred face. With a sigh, he went to get the man some bindings to wrap him in. He had just finished wrapping the man in a mountain of bandages when he saw a cloud of dust rapidly moving toward him. He attempted to squint at the approaching wave by raising a hand to his eyes, but he was bowled over and into a dumpster instead. "Get out of the way. Arg. Watch where you're going, damn it." "Kyo? What are you doing?" Samui screamed to a halt, barely recognizing him. The man moaned and stumbled to his feet, saying, "Coulda asked you the same thing." He threw a banana peel off his scalp as he emerged from the dumpster. Samui's nose wrinkled. "I'm heading to the guild," she shouted. "I think it might be under attack. Didn't you see the flare?" About that. Don't tell me, did you set it off, Kyo?" the woman asked, her eyes narrowing. "No," he said with a straight face. In actuality, he hadn't been the one who had done it. Samui appeared dubious of his response until she saw the unconscious mage at his feet. She turned to her teammate and said, That is Doranbolt. Then it means the Rune Knights are really here. I guess." They were about to continue when they saw a menacing shadow moving across the landscape. Kyo glanced up at the sky and saw a thick, black cloud moving quickly against the direction of the wind. Samui realized, whispering, "It's heading for our guild. We have to stop it. Kyo, follow me." As he watched the woman take off once more, the man with the dark hair let out a sigh. After joining a guild, there wasn't really any rest, was there? "Captain Doranbolt is down." "What?" Pakura exclaimed in disbelief. Not even 20 minutes had passed since he had joined the battle. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes," Shino said ambivalently. "But why?" "Because that's what my bugs tell me, so it's the whole truth." A third voice, somewhat baritone and a little worn out from repeated use, added, "I am a bit bothered by that cloud. Wouldn't it have been less noticeable to disperse those insects around town rather than coalesce them all together in one place?" the voice asked. The user of the bug furrowed his brows. "Yes," Pakura replied, "it would have, but Shino's bug cloud magic is not just some simple surveillance technique. It also allows the user to pinpoint and engulf an already preset target." "In this case, you mean this Naruto person?" "Yes," said Pakura. "I'm happy you took our call, even though it was a little late." "I apologize for that, Pakura-chan. But Ichiya thought it necessary to belay my arrival once again, although, I must admit, it was somewhat refreshing to have such a hot-blooded spar of youth." He was disregarded by the orange bangs, green-haired captain. Instead, she inquired, "How many magic signatures are present within that town, Shino?" "Excluding Captain Doranbolt, that would make 4, replied the young mage, who was still in contact with the bugs he owned. 2 of them are stationary northeast from this direction, while the nearest one is moving rapidly across town just west of here. However, there is only one wizard saint-level mage among them, and he is far off towards the back of town." "That would be the target," Pakura said. "It's a good thing we wouldn't have to deal with Fernandez too." The third person rubbed his chin and murmured, Wizard saint level, you say? Interesting?" My bugs are currently honing in on the tracker I placed on his person. They would be upon Uzumaki's location in mere minutes, Shino said. And once they do, they will take him out instantly. Then that would be our signal. Once Naruto has been incapacitated, our forces would move into town and eliminate the rest, Pakura said. Ready your weapons, men. We wouldn't bother taking survivors. Behind her, the knights gave a somber salute. Shino felt an unfamiliar pressure enter his head while he was still standing beside his allies. Pakura noticed Captain Aburame's uneasiness and asked, "What's wrong, Captain Aburame?" The bug mage scowled and rubbed his temples, saying, "I don't know, it's like." As soon as he realized what had gone wrong, he cursed. He attempted to break off his relationship with the insects, but it was too late. Before collapsing to a boneless heap on the ground, he let out a cry of agony as a strong pressure tore through his skull. Shino. In a moment, Pakura was by his side, but the man was unconscious and could not answer any of their calls. Medic. She growled at the group behind her, praying Shino was not irreparably hurt. Since the subdue and scouting plans have failed, I'm guessing we would move into the attack phase. We can't sit back any longer, Pakura-chan, her other colleague said casually, uncrossing his arms from his muscular torso. They know we are here and have taken advantage of the fact by incapacitating 2 of our captains already. I know, Pakura spat, turning to look at the man, but he had already left her side at her words and was no longer there. The plan had failed, but perhaps there was still hope. All she could hope was that when Guy finished, he would leave something for the others. Previously, Kyo sighed, mostly in annoyance. Oi, what do you think you're doing? Right now, he was standing on top of the old church, which was the tallest structure in Wisteria. With her long legs balanced precariously across his torso, his partner sat on his shoulders. If someone else had been on him, Kyo would have made the most of the little time off to appreciate the female specimen's finer features, but this was the Ice Queen, Samui. Since he now had an extra pair of limbs on his shoulders, Kyo was unable to even dare to touch them, no matter how tempted he was, because he was well aware of the damage those beautiful thighs could do to him if provoked. Will you just hold still? I recognize that magic. I need to be as high up as possible to counter it. Naturally, she said all of this with her characteristic stoniness, as though she didn't care about the discomfort she was causing him. Kyo followed the instructions exactly as the blonde mage closed her eyes and lifted delicate fingers to her forehead. This is the magic of Shino Aburame, she said. His bugs trace signals, which means he must have planted a tracker on one of us prior to this. Kyo looked at the ominous cloud that had already descended upon them. Given that Naruto would be the only person inside the guild building, it was clear that this was its target. He was already aware that the council couldn't have allowed them to get away with it. With concern, he said, "What do we do now?" Samui was tightly closing her eyes. This type of magic requires a strong connection to be maintained between insect and user in order to work right. If I can tap into the right psychic frequency. Mind-eye magic. Blade, she exclaimed as her eyes instantly opened with glowing blue pupils. The girl sent a psychic ripple outward. It appeared as though nothing had changed at first, but over time, Kyo noticed a distortion among the bugs. Before long, the cloud completely stopped, and the magic insects dispersed into glitter as they fluttered to the ground. Is that it? Kyo asked, releasing the girl. Yes? I guess we are real lucky to have you on our team then, but what is the next course of action? The dark-haired man asked, observing her adjusting her short skirt distractedly. As he approached the tiled roof's edge, Samui said, "Get Naruto-sama and leave. We can't stay in this town any longer." Seriously? Kyo scoffed. You think the boss is just gonna abandon his new guild, after he only just built it? It's only a building, the woman said, turning to glare at him. Well, yeah, I know, right? Kyo replied with a shrug, but good luck telling the boss that I don't know how the council located us this quickly, but if Naruto has any say in the matter, then they'd be the ones packing out of town, not him. Samui had been about to respond when a bright burst of light abruptly blinded them both. After the flash subsided, they were left staring at a monstrous man who had seemingly materialized out of thin air. Given that the man was only somewhat tall and still had many human characteristics, Kyo reasoned that perhaps he wasn't truly a monster, but that was the extent of his humanity. Kyo couldn't help but scream in surprise after taking one look at the bowl-cut hair, thick, bushy brows, and prominent lower eyelashes. Ow! My eyes! It burns! The newcomer's smile expanded, demonstrating that the dazzling light from earlier had been the sunlight reflecting off his spotless teeth. Indeed, he yelled with delight, it is most youthful to feast your eyes on your opponent right before an explosive battle begins. What's the deal, man? Kyo laughed, observing the odd green clothing the man was wearing under his council robes. Can you believe this clown, Samui? He asked, turning to face her anxiously when he didn't receive a response. With an odd fear in her voice, Samui yelled, "Don't be fooled, Kyo. This man you see before you, that is Might Guy." Kyo looked back at the new arrival Mighty Guy. What kind of guy was a Might Guy? He wondered, feeling a little nervous now. In any event, a woman with Samui's level of composure could only be considered a serious threat without even realizing it. The black-haired mage shifted into a fighting stance. Guy patiently noted, "I see you've heard tales about the green beast of youth." His eyes were sharp and narrowed as he studied them. "You're not too unyouthful yourselves, you know," he said. "But I must ask of you, are you allied with Naruto Uzumaki, the ones responsible for the elimination of our captains?" Unflinching, Samui met his gaze and said, "Yes. I see, in the universal sign of, come get it." Guy abruptly raised his left arm in front of him like a shield, slipped his right arm behind his back, and brought his feet together in a fighting stance. "Then you understand why I cannot let either of you escape here alive," warned him, "so sorry." "Kyo, move!" shouted Samui before the blow was delivered. The brunette saw it, but before his arms could even finish arcing, he attempted to defend against the powerful onslaught. The jaw-breaking kick smashed against his face, sending him flying off the roof. Samui's heart leapt into her throat as she gasped she could think of no better hand-to-hand specialist than the former dark mage that he was so easily defeated. "Fair maiden, don't take your eyes off me," yelled Guy. Even though Samui ducked clumsily to the ground, the captain's spinning kick sailed over her head with ease. Saving her, she pulled a dagger from her sleeve and swung at the man in the air, but before the blow could land, he disappeared. Leaf whirlwind. Oh no. Unable to stop the man who had now resurfaced right inside her defenses, she cursed. Great kick. Even as she was propelled skyward, a shockwave of pain tore through her skull as the powerful kick struck her jaw. In agony, she clenched her teeth. "This is not how I would fall." When she felt a presence appear right beneath her, her eyes, which had been glowing blue in defiance, dimmed in shock. Guy's baritone voice spoke to her over the wind. "I can see you are the telepath. You are dangerous, so you must forgive me for the manner in which I must use to take you out," he said. Samui craned her head to stare at the man who was now floating in perfect harmony beneath her, gasping, "How?" Guy said, "I'll do this as quickly as I can." "Front lotus," he said, putting both arms around her torso and holding her firmly. "What the hell do you think you're doing to Samui?" someone exclaimed. Guy was knocked clean out of the air before he could blink, and the woman was caught in a pair of warm hands before she could smash through the roof. Samui realized she didn't even need to open her eyes to look at her savior. Anywhere she heard that voice, she recognized that smile. Naruto pointed an accusing finger at the captain and yelled, "You filthy pervert! Were you trying to hump her just now?" With animated hand gestures, the green beast spluttered at the charge, saying, What? I did no such thing. That is a most unyouthful claim to make." "Don't lie to me," Naruto snorted contemptuously. "I saw you clearly. I'm the only one allowed to even dream of humping her like that." "Naruto-sama." The blonde paused his accusation to give the girl a worried look, only to be struck in the face by a fist. "All right," he moaned in agony, "I earned that." With her anger toward her leader already forgotten, Samui wheezed, "Be careful, Naruto-sama, he's strong, almost as strong as you." Another voice cut in, "Why don't you stop yapping, sis? We're here now, we'd take care of things." Kyo's lifeless body was lying on top of a large clay bird when Deidara swooped down on it. "You?" Guy exclaimed, his eyes widening in shock. "Yeah, me," Deidara shot back, his mouth hanging open in laughter. "Seriously, what did you people expect? I'm a part of this guild too." "Where have you been?" Naruto asked, turning to face the artist with a suspicious expression. Deidara sighed, "Here and there. You honestly didn't expect me to waste my art doing all those awful chores, did you, leader? I've told you before, art is an explosion. 2 of the 3 men we've been looking for the most are right here before me. Am I young enough to take them both on?" Guy said, putting a finger under his chin. "Your fight is with me," Naruto snarled. Spitting spittle, he looked over at Deidara. He gave Samui to the man, saying, "Take these 2 and head back to the guild." Despite her weakened state, Samui was still able to wriggle at the artist's touch. "I'll deal with you later." "Sorry, can't do that, What do you mean?" "A squad of rune knights are headed our way, Leader-san. Not that I doubt your unique skills, but I'd say even you would find it hard-pressed to take on Captain Adam here and those runts all at the same time," Deidara said, putting a hand over his brow and revealing his artificial eye. Naruto grunted and said, "All right, you can assist, but first get Samui-chan to safety." Deidara smiled and made another clay bird to carry his fallen guild members. Now that you're speaking my language, he said, but I'm already way ahead of you, ya know? I haven't really been doing nothing all day, watch this. When the Rune Knights noticed some strange shapes skittering across their path, they mounted their warbeasts and headed straight for the church. A garrison sergeant pulled to a stop to study the creatures and asked, "What's this?" Their whitish color and somewhat lifeless appearance were the only things that set them apart from overlarge crickets. "Hey, what do you think these are, Captain? Are they trying to distract us?" One by one, the other knights stopped to examine the strange inventions. "You idiots! Get away from those! That's clay magic. They're all bow," Pakura said, pale in recognition as she glanced over her shoulder in the direction of the disturbance. Just a few meters away, on top of the church, Deidara smiled and raised 2 fingers to his face. Katsu. The town was filled with the sound of a miniature explosion. The artist smirked and licked his lips ravenously. "So, what do you think, leader?" he asked. "Art is an explosion, right?" Guy cried out in distress, "Pakura," and hurried to look at the scene over the roof's edge. "You monsters," he said, turning to face the 2 men with a look of rage on his face. "Deidara," was Naruto's calm voice. The artist looked expectantly at his leader and smiled. "Yeah? Those men? The ones you just bombed, they were your former comrades, right?" Deidara muttered, "Yeah, well, you can say that. And you were once their leader too? I guess." With a smile that barely reached his eyes, Naruto said, "Good, go down there and help them. If any of them are dead, I won't forgive you." "Say what?" blanched the former detention corps captain. "You heard me," said Naruto. "Those men were once your comrades. If you can harm them without a second thought, or a first one for that matter, I shudder to think what you would do when you finally leave our guild." A moment of quiet fell across the roof. Guy even gave the 2 men a startled blink. Deidara finally gave in, squatting down on his bird. "I'll do what you want this time, leader." His voice rasped, "But remember, my art always comes first. It constantly demands a demonstration." "He ascended into the heavens," Might Guy remarked. "If I may ask, why are you doing this?" as he watched the other blonde fly off towards the carnage. "You are something else, Uzumaki-san." Naruto pulled a pinky out of his ear and said, "Doing what exactly?" "Everything," the green beast said, stepping forward. "You are obviously a man of honor, a fine man, and the student of one of the finest men I've ever known. What could possibly be the reason for your bad blood with the council?" "I don't know, I just needed answers, I guess," shrugged Naruto. "I see," Guy said with comprehension. "A political issue, then it pains me to use lethal force against the son of a man I greatly admired too. However, I hope to assuage that by making this battle as quick and painless as possible." "That's fine by me," Naruto laughed. "I wasn't exactly planning on stalling either. Can we get started then?" "I guess we can." "All right." Naruto rolled his shoulders and grunted. "Wait a minute, what's that?" Guy looked in the direction the blonde had indicated and asked, "What?" "Sucker." The captain was hurled through the air after a strong fist struck his stomach almost immediately. Guy turned and straightened himself. "That was most unyouthful, Uzumaki-san." "Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't, but you hurt my guild members. That is more than reason enough to make you suffer," Naruto said with a smile and a crack of his knuckles. Guy scowled as he settled into the strong fist technique's comfortable stance. The heaviness of Mahu filled the air, and between the 2 fighters, anticipation crackled like electricity. Naruto said, "Sage magic. Rooftop projectiles. First." Naturally, he was in for another surprise if the blonde tried to defeat him with any feeble telekinetic maneuver. Guy watched without blinking as the tiles flew toward him after sliding off the roof. In one instant, he was standing far away from his assailant, his powerful fist still in place. In the next, he was standing next to him, the tiles gently striking the spot where he had previously stood. "You'd have to do better than that, Uzumaki-san," warned him. "Leaf grade kick." But to his utter surprise, Naruto leaned back, avoiding the blow entirely. The green beast nearly fell off the roof when a sandaled foot sped straight up and crashed into Guy's face. "I've already seen you use that move once," Naruto laughed. "You honestly think you can catch me with it? Well, how about this? Toad magic. Oil flame bullets." Numerous protrusions were reduced to dust as the concentrated pins of fire destroyed the entire roof. Might Guy was still nimble enough to dodge them all. In spite of this, with a thunderous noise, the 2 men charged directly at the blonde. Trading blows at an incredible speed, Naruto quickly grew weary of the game. Even though both were resilient enough to withstand the blows they each took, Guy attempted to sweep his feet out from under him with a leaf gale kick, which gave him his opening. Oil flame bomb. Putting both index fingers to his mouth in anticipation of the devastating fire attack, Naruto leapt over the other man like a giant toad. The roof collapsed completely, falling into the sanctum below as the stream of white fire consumed it. Naruto carefully touched down on a portion of the wall and examined the harm he had caused with a defiant expression in his eyes. Guy himself stood tall at the base of the church, still in the strong fist pose, but his green spandex, which still looked spotless in spite of his charred appearance, had been burned off along with his council robes. Relaxed, Naruto yelled down to him, "How long were you hoping to keep doing this? Your style is impressive and all, but I was hoping for some magic to keep things interesting." A true wizard should always be willing to train both his magic and body, Uzumaki-san, Guy said quietly. "I train 6 hours a day in order to attain perfection." Yeah, while that is good and all, you do realize that there are some opponents you simply cannot overcome with hard work alone, right? Naruto asked sagely. Sometimes, you would need more than just rigorous training to do the impossible. The assumption that a genius of hard work will always come out on top, Uzumaki-san. The only fireproof way of doing anything right is by working with your own hands, and sweat and blood, seemed to offend Guy in a genuine way. Nah, hard work is overrated, Naruto said. If hard work meant everything, I don't see a rookie like Jellal making it as one of the wizard saints before even hitting maturity, and don't even let me get started on the rest. Face it, a traditional genius is 10 times better at anything a commoner can do, even if he puts in 10 times less the effort. Naruto's words were met with silence. Guy stood thoughtfully for a moment before lowering himself steadily. He sadly shook his head. "I realize with some dismay that you have a rather pitiable outlook on life, Uzumaki-san," he said. "Although your fighting style and magic closely resemble that of Jiraiya, it is obvious you have a substantially different mentality from him." Guy was surrounded by a strong magical aura, and his temples started to show thick veins. "However, to prove you wrong, I would show you, Uzumaki-san, the power that became accessible to me only through hard work. Feast your eyes on my magic. That of my beautiful youth." "Youth?" asked Naruto, raising an eyebrow in confusion. He was undoubtedly older than 40, but when he felt a sudden surge in the man's magical power, that confusion gave way to seriousness. "What the?" Now, a strong wind churning from Guy's feet was blowing his hair upward, making it stand on end. The muscles concealed by his green spandex had become even more noticeable, and his irises had turned completely white. The blue magical aura poured over him in waves, and his entire skin had turned an eldritch red. Guy yelled, "Daytime tiger," as his energy tripled once more. "This is it, springtime of youth magic." Guy erupted in rage and launched himself skyward in a forceful punching motion, leaving Naruto with only one word. Damn, he was about to experience immense pain. Pakura sensed the powerful energies that had erupted around her and couldn't help breaking out a tiny smile. Guy was going all out. He was practically unstoppable with his youthful, springtime magic. Every time he launched an attack, only a wizard saint could stop him. Guy became one of the most famous and respected knights in history for this reason alone. He was nearly as revered as Minato-sama himself. The spandex-loving captain could use the constellation's power to help him in battle, providing him with a power boost equal to 10 S-class mages at once, provided he maintained optimal physical condition. She grimaced as she stood up, her ears still ringing from the earlier attack. She was relieved that at least part of their mission was proceeding as planned. That is, until she saw him. He was hovering on his bird, leaning down to inspect the wounded and pillaging them in a pile across the street before she exploded in cosmic rage. Fury danced across her vision, and she didn't even bother to figure out what he had been doing. Deidara. One of the knights had just been getting up when the first blaze orb slammed into him, barely missing his face as it flew past his head. Instantly, the man withered, every iota of moisture sapped from his body, his now too big uniform crumpling to the ground. Shit. Deidara swore and quickly flew into the air. Before pursuing the man who had unluckily gotten in her line of fire, Pakura only needed a moment to recoil. If they could get him to a clinic in time, they could resuscitate him later, but the bastard was her main target, and she had no intention of letting him get away from her anytime soon. "Come back here, murderer. You're under arrest in the name of the council. Stop. You crazy bitch, I know what you can do. I'm not letting you get close to me even with a 30-foot R." Deidara called over his shoulder, eyeing her incredulously. "Are you mad?" 6 of the pinkish blaze orbs streaked through the air at meteorite-like speeds after Pakura had aimed again. Deidara skillfully sidestepped each of them before turning on his bird. In retaliation, his palm released 3 tiny missiles that resembled birds and headed straight for Pakura. They grew in size just before impact, ready to obliterate a significant section of the road only to deteriorate and decay. Even though a pinkish aura surrounded her body, Pakura grinned darkly and said, "Have you forgotten? My magic easily trumps yours, organic or inorganic. Your clay still possess aqueous molecules that I can dry up. You mean water of crystallization? She responded with yet another barrage of orbs aimed directly at the artist. When large clouds came into contact with her magic, they dried up, and Didera turned to face her in terror. What's your problem? If you keep this up, you'd do more than harm the man you just did. You'd harm the ecosystem and innocent bystanders too. Pakura raised another blaze orb. Sneer. Don't compare yourself to me, you lowlife. You willingly used your own men as meatbags and suicide bombers in your obnoxious quest for glory. I would never forgive you for tarnishing the honor of our name. Are you sure that's what this is about? Didera asked in midair. I know I did some terrible things, but can you definitely say that your behavior isn't a direct result of the manner in which I left you? Blaze magic. Elimination of the wicked, exclaimed Pakura. The man in the air was hit by a massive ball of pinkish energy. It appeared to those below that the sun had just been sucked up by a gigantic alien blob. As the orb rapidly grew in size, Pakura grinned and said, let's see you stop that one. It would grow larger and faster the more moisture it took in, to the point where even Didera, with his well-known Mach speeds, would struggle to avoid it. On the other hand, the artist didn't even try to move. Even though the large ball of death was speeding in his direction, he remained composed. I told you. Art is an explosion, Katsu. He grinned as he leapt backwards off his bird and brought his palms together just before impact. The sky turned a fiery red as the bird he had been hovering over exploded with nothing else to absorb. The orb gradually dissipated as the dry conditions drove all the moisture out of the immediate atmosphere. You said your magic counters mine, Didera boasted, already perched atop a new bird that was considerably sleeker than the previous one. You forget that mine easily counters yours too. We're locked in a stalemate. He scratched his head briefly before saying, or maybe, we're not locked in a stalemate. I'd like to believe that I can trump you any day. With a frown of rage, Pakura threw another blast of blaze magic at him. As he skillfully dodged the projectiles, the blonde man taunted, how long do you intend to keep doing this? I can dodge these in my sleep. Some of the orbs nearly struck his person, but his clay bombs quickly negated any that did. Pakura's lethal force field deactivated a set of missiles that streaked through the air in retaliation. Didera would have been happy to keep things this way, but he caught a glimpse of Naruto being blasted into a wall. He shouted, you okay there, leader? Naruto appeared quite unimpressed as he stepped out of the wreckage. Maybe you want to switch dance partners? The Toad Sage growled, shut it, glaring at Didera once before turning to face Guy when the man landed in front of him. I must compliment you, Uzumaki-san. Guy said. You are doubly strong in both will and constitution. Constitution? The bewildered blonde asked, isn't that like a law or something? It can also mean physical characteristics, Uzumaki-san. Oh, Guy shifted his position, the blue aura still rapidly circling his body. Few can survive a direct hit from my springtime of youth magic, you know, he said, extending his limbs. However, you've taken multiple hits to critical areas, Uzumaki-san, and still you stand. If you weren't an enemy, perhaps I would have commended you better? With a somewhat painful shrug, Naruto said, yeah, I guess that's just me. Your youthfulness is truly impressive, Naruto-san. I appreciate your feelings of sportsmanship. To reciprocate, I'll let you get one free hit in since I haven't actually given you the chance to fight back since I youthfully activated my magic. Naruto smiled and said, nah thanks, I'll pass. I'm not really ready to attack you yet either. What do you mean, not ready? Do you mean to say you've been letting me pummel you all this time? Guy interrupted. Well, kinda, the blonde said, her expression suddenly serious. I was thinking I could just run around and let you wear your magic out. Guy spat, wear my magic out? You called it daytime tiger, didn't you? Which means, when the day runs out, you'd be powerless, right? I noticed your punches have been getting weaker each second, and look, the sun's even setting now, he ended by indicating the horizon. At that moment, Guy reconsidered his thoughts about the criminal, Naruto Uzumaki. He wasn't an honorable but foolish villain by no means. In fact, he was incredibly and dishonestly perceptive. A correct deduction, Uzumaki, Guy said, forgetting all formalities. My springtime of youth magic works with the hour of the clock. Daytime tiger, as the name suggests, is at its peak at noon and loses its strength with each hour that passes by. However, the blue aura briefly faded to almost undetectable levels before a fiery orange hue took its place a few seconds later. It is not the only time-based move in my arsenal, Sunset Eagle. Naruto turned pale. He certainly didn't have any breaks in life, did he? This time, Naruto held his ground as Guy ran forward. In his palm, a revolving sphere of concentrated magic came to life. That's the magic method that Minato-san is known for, Guy only realized after the fact. Rasengan. A strong burst of Mahu was released when the Rasengan and his fist collided, sending both mages hurtling backward. In addition to the many other injuries he had already sustained, Naruto moaned as he pulled himself free from a building wall and felt a throb in his shoulder. Perhaps I should have finished the Pervy Sage's training before I started going up against these types of guys, he said. Across the street from him, he saw his opponent get up from a destroyed building. He was extremely disappointed to see that the man didn't even appear to be slightly hurt. We can't continue like this, damn it. He swore even though Naruto was confident he could still defeat Guy. There were other things to take care of, and Guy's strength would only grow as night fell since Kyo and Samui were still injured. He couldn't possibly jeopardize their safety for his small-time retaliation in the event that council reinforcements showed up as a result. Just a week ago, he made a choice that he would never have thought possible. He pulled back. He shouted, "Deidara, we're leaving," as he saw Guy roar into life and get ready to charge at him. Still weaving wildly through the air, the artist screamed back incredulously, "What? You're seriously gonna leave your new guild building behind? You?" Naruto was unable to respond. After waiting until the very last second, he managed to jump away from Guy's charge. He muttered, "Food card destroyer," until he was buried nearly 4 feet into the ground. The green-clad mage was too preoccupied with removing his charge to notice the 5,000 tons of toad meat that had been summoned directly on top of him. Alright, so it was a shady strategy, but Naruto wasn't particularly concerned about it now. "Deidara," he shouted again in a hurry as he landed atop the enormous, peculiar-looking toad, which was nearly the size of a small hill. With a shit-eating grin on his face, the blonde artist shot out of the sky and came to a painful stop beside his leader's feet as a loud explosion sounded, but his left sleeve, which he held in his right hand, appeared emancipated and shrunk. "What did you do?" Naruto started to ask, but he looked out to the streets below after hearing a savage yell out of the smoke. A solemn-looking Pakura strode forward, her head all but bald except for a few sparse hairs. Death was a huge, pinkish hue that emanated from her. "Who's that?" He swallowed. "Some girl I dated." After glancing at her, Deidara said, "You better get us out of here, leader, it won't be pretty." Gathering his courage, Naruto muttered, "Right, get in." The other man trailed off, realization beginning to creep into his features. "Get in? But what happened to the other two? Not that I really care, mind you, and what about our Gui?" he asked. "Don't tell me this is our guild house?" He groaned, slapping a palm to his face. Deidara felt the rough, gland-filled surface beneath him open up in response to Naruto's smile, and then he plummeted into the depths of the now amphibian guild house below. Naruto saw a small group of people gathered just outside the battle radius. As he was about to follow him, some of the townspeople he had become somewhat acquainted with were among them. Gustav the Butcher, Miner Hampton, Old Man Damien, Lumberjack Wes, his 2 younger brothers Russell and Lo, his goats, and his now heavily pregnant wife Miriam were all present. Standing next to his teenage daughter Annabelle, whose whitish blonde hair fluttered gently in the wind, was Farmer Mason. The whole Lafau family, Petunia, Elijah Whitaker, and Old Crone were standing right next to them. Naruto thought he saw Inari, the bartender, hovering just behind the back of the group. Everyone, with the exception of Inari, who continued to be as uninteresting as ever, stared at him with differing expressions of fear or wonder, and Naruto had an epiphany. He cherished these people. One day, he could see himself relocating to this charming small town. "Wisteria Town," he exclaimed, feeling compelled to say something along the lines of, "I am Naruto Uzumaki, Toad Sage and 2nd Guild Master of the Toadstool Guild. Do not be afraid. You have all just witnessed the birth of what would one day become the greatest guild in all of Fury, and for that, I am most grateful. Thank you. Thank you all for your patience and kindly treatment towards me, and I assure you, you would not be disappointed. This marks the beginning of a new era. An era of..." 3 blaze orbs passed his head at that very moment, nearly killing him instantly. As he watched a deranged Pakura charge up a terrifyingly large, skull-like orb, he squeaked quickly, "Well then. We'll be going now, do have a nice day." He made a magic seal and vanished, even as the mutant toad took a giant leap across the length of the town, shrinking into normal size mid-air, before disappearing into the mountains. His actions that day put Wisteria on the map and gave the townspeople enough gossip to feed their descendants for generations. The legend of the Toadstool Guild had begun. It was midday, hot and arid. A lone figure trekked through the dunes, heavily clad in clothing that would have been tagged inappropriate considering the climate of the area. It spoke volumes of the scorching heat that the man's tears, which were usually seen flowing relentlessly down his face, were nowhere to be found. Nonetheless, the great lug of a man surged forward. Undaunted, approaching the only structure in the entire desert with a weary but anticipatory edge to his stride. "This is it," he smiled grimly, diverting his blindfolded eyes to the small slip of parchment in his hands. You are probably wondering how it was even possible for him to see anything at all through his blindfold, but it is rumored that it had something to do with wind magic, although, what that something was, I can't exactly say. The building the man now stood before was an abandoned one run down, with a missing roof and rotted walls. It stood alone amongst the dunes. Its once luxurious courtyard cracked now and caked with sand and looking at odds with the rest of its surroundings. A simple stone archway was all that remained of the roof. Signaling the position of the main entrance upon the arc was an inscription, an unreadable one, and an image depicting two oval-shaped almonds. The entire place seemed to pulse with a negative aura, so much so that it noticeably distorted the very air around the house. Nevertheless, if the visitor noticed it, he didn't appear very bothered. He strode through the worn doorway with ease and bellowed throatily at the top of his lungs. "I am here. I have followed your call and come forth to arms. I have arrived to fulfill the mission. I will stop the desert tide." All was still within the ruined building for a moment, but then there was movement from within the deepest, most rotted part of the ruins. Emotionless teal eyes blinked once, then twice, from a spot even the sunlight failed to reach. "You have come." A voice slithered across the room, reeking of malevolence. The guest didn't hesitate. He gazed into the faceless eyes in front of him, seemingly unconcerned that they had appeared out of thin air. "Are you the client of this mission?" he asked, "the one who will pay me the 1,000,000 jewels?" With a disinterested flash of teal eyes, he said, "Yes." The man wearing the blindfold smiled as tears finally began to fall from his eyes. "Great Phantom, may your name be praised. How long have I searched for a mission with a pay worthy enough for my services?" he exclaimed, raising his hands to the sky. The creature in the shadows caught his attention once more. "What is this that I must do?" he asked. "You are here to help me disprove my existence," the voice said, slithering through the air again, but with the slightest hint of agony. As though the enormous man hadn't just completed a strenuous journey across the desert, the tears continued to fall. "Disprove your existence?" The straightforward response to "yes" was, "I wish for you to kill me." Arya of the Wind was stunned for the first time since leaving the Phantom Lord Guild. Even his fabled tears came to a complete stop. Kill you? Yes, to help you disprove your existence?" His eyes bobbed up and down as he nodded slowly in response. "What does that mean?" Even though there was no wind to move the sand grains, they still skittered across the floor. "Because I will kill you otherwise if you don't. To help me disprove my existence, you have to show me that you cannot be killed by me." Arya's jaw tightened in concern as she asked, "But what happens if I do kill you? How then will I get my pay?" When the voice answered after a pause, Arya was unable to determine whether it was filled with pride or sadness. "No one has been able to kill me so far. No one can disprove my existence." The Wind Mage gave a frustrated hiss. Apparently, this mission was also a hoax. The customer didn't even have the funds to make the payment in the first place, and they had no intention of doing so. Arya's face suddenly took on a dangerous sort of restlessness. Too many times he had been let down. He didn't travel 50 miles from home, across a freaking desert, to listen to the nonsense being spewed by a rebellious recluse, even though he was in dire need of money. With a final burst of tears, he ripped the blindfold from his face and said, "You have no idea of whom you just challenged. I am Arya, member of the once renowned Element 4. I control the very elements you take into your veins." That was the last thing he said. His exposed eyes glowed strangely, a crisscross of scarlet in dead orbs. "You've just challenged magic of a level you certainly cannot comprehend. Be prepared. Wind magic. Death Space 0. The atmosphere was charged with tension as Arya's magic came to life. The decayed shack was silent until a voice cut through the atmosphere like death's whisper. "Desert funeral." The sand grains came to life. "What is this?" "What?" Naruto asked, snapping out of his reverie and turning to look at the woman standing a few centimeters below him. Just a few seconds ago, he had been contemplating something sinister, but now that he had been cut off, he was unable to recall precisely what. A little annoyed that the man hadn't been paying attention to her, Samui huffed. "What's this?" she asked again, pointing to a section of the wall with her finger. Naruto's eyes followed her arm, pausing briefly to take in the amazing view of cleavage before beaming with delight. "Oh, it's something I noticed in some of the other guilds, the Pervy Sage, and I visited. It's like a hall of fame, to recognize all the masters of a guild, both past and present." For Naruto, bringing up the Pervy Sage once more brought back unpleasant memories of a simpler period of his life when his only concerns had been training and exploring the world. Those days were over, though before those emotions could show on his face, he suppressed them. His friends already had enough anxiety, there was no need to add to it. As he surveyed the space with skepticism, Samui said, I notice with some dismay that our Hall of Fame is simply the section of the wall situated behind the bar. Naruto complained, automatically settling into a pattern he was growing accustomed to. Hey, I took the time polishing this part of the wood. You know, maybe next time, when something like this comes up, you can be the one doing the polishing. Help me with that parcel next to you, okay? He said. Despite being precariously balanced on one foot atop the mini ladder, the woman raised the article to her leader, who had no trouble reaching for it. She wrinkled her nose in perplexity and said, I already see your silly face up there on the wall. What's that one for? Naturally, the blonde's perpetually happy mug was already displayed for everyone to see on his recently constructed wall of fame. If that was the only reason Naruto had gotten it built, he would have been happy with it that way. He tore a picture frame from the package and grinned, saying, this is for the first guild master. It's only right that his should get to come before mine. Samui and Kyo, who had just strayed from the pantry, croaked out, first guild master? Of course there's a first guild master. Didn't you think of that when I announced that I was the second? Said Naruto, scowling. Oh, Samui said, unfazed. So then, who's the first? Jiraiya, the legendary Toad Sage founder and first guild master of the Toadstool Guild. Naruto smiled and displayed the photo on the wall to the left of his. A nasally voice finally broke the brief period of silence. The voice said, Oi, what makes you think I'm gonna let that stand? With a moan, Naruto shut his eyes. Inviting Deidara to join his guild was turning out to be the most foolish choice he had ever made. Really, he was starting to despise his own carelessness. Even releasing the insane artist from his prison cell was a mistake. He turned to face the man with narrowed eyes and scowled at the former detention corps captain, who was sitting at one end of the bar and fiddling with some clay in one hand. He had submerged the other arm, which was darkened and withered, in a big jug of water. He growled, what do you mean? We haven't even accepted you as our guild master yet, and there you are appointing a second one without our rightful consent. What the hell happened to voting and stuff? Deidara repeated, nearly toppling the water jar in his rage. The pervy sage is the founder of our guild. Stupid, Naruto growled. He should be the one who even appointed me. He was the first guild master back when the guild was only a two-man guild. Kyo and Samui came to a halt. By two-man guild, you mean back when the both of you were still wandering the countryside, Naruto-sama? Samui asked. Exactly. The man snarled this time. The two flinched in memory of the prisoner they had met on Yoshino just a month prior. With a final sigh, Samui crossed the hearth to sit on a couch and said, do whatever you want, Naruto-sama. It is your guild. She then pulled out a book, ending her own contribution to the conversation. Kyo gave her a quick glance before focusing on his leader. He abruptly changed the subject to suit his needs, saying, but you know what, I'm starved. Isn't there something to eat around here apart from instant ramen and sake? Naruto hissed, his features darkening significantly, don't you dare touch my ramen. How do you even expect to eat when you don't go out on enough jobs? He said. It was true that the mission requests board was empty and would likely stay that way for a while. Naruto-sama, Samui said icily, you do realize that the reason we don't go out on any jobs is because there are no jobs to go out on. One blank piece of parchment with a red line cut diagonally across its length was the only item on it, and the only item that came with it. It was never discussed, not to their leader's face, anyway. What do you mean? Naruto gasped. I've been getting as much work as I can for you guys. You mean the menial get at most 100 joules labor you have us doing most of the time, Naruto-sama? Samui scowled. Those things don't exactly count as jobs. In fact, no mage should ever be required to stoop that low. Seriously, boss, Kyo responded, we can't keep going on like this. If we don't get real missions soon, this guild is gonna fall apart. Naruto sighed and put the ladder in a secure spot under the bar. Where do you want me to get missions from? He asked. The council gathers mission requests and distributes them to the legal guilds in accordance with their strength and popularity. Guilds like ours have no hope of ever receiving missions from the council. Samui offered, well then, how do dark guilds get their requests? Dark guilds? She shrugged and said, we have to start somewhere. Oh, that's pretty easy, replied Kyo. The council only collect missions on the right side of the moral scale, so there is a huge surplus of demand for mages who are willing to do dirty work. There's an underground network, you see, one that allows dark guilds to receive and carry out jobs, those that are unacceptable to the council. Now with genuine interest, Naruto asked, what network is that? In all of his time with Jiraiya, he had never heard any of this, but to be fair, he hadn't been paying much attention to the man's lessons either. Still holding his withered arm in the water jar, Deidara cut him off, saying, he's talking about the Balam Alliance. The Balam Alliance? I thought that was only a non-aggressive pact? Shay, the artist grinned, apparently pleased that he knew something Naruto did not. Non-aggressive pact, my foot, how else do you think dark guilds get their funding? Or did you think everything they do is solely for their own nefarious benefits? He sat down and allowed his prominent tuft of hair to hide his visage. All popular misconceptions aside, what the Alliance truly functions as is a sort of ranking system that distributes requests among the dark guilds. It is little known fact, but the true head of the Alliance is not Grimoire Hart, or Asion Cease, or even those bitches. Tartarus instead. The whole shenanigan is run by a shadowy group known as the Balam Corporation, which is where the Alliance gets its name. It was this organization I was investigating before I got thrown in the locker. Naruto considered this for a while. It was also reasonable to assume that if a strong corporation controlled the majority of the underworld, it would possess knowledge that the council did not. Above all, details about the underworld, information about a specific masked man. Most likely Naruto wasn't especially eager to sleep with the kind of people the Balam Alliance dealt with, but if he could obtain such information. So, what you're basically saying, he said, while keeping his thoughts to himself, is that if I want to be allocated requests on a regular basis, all I'd have to do is sign up with this Balam Corporation. Tell me, what qualifications does one need to get into this alliance? When Kyo saw the boss's expression darken, he quickly added, I'm guessing that it would only be a matter of time. The Balam Alliance usually finds you after all. You don't find them? Kyo shrugged. You'd have to own a dark guild for one, seeing as you've already got that part covered thanks to our little skirmish with the council. Well, we can't wait forever for them. Grated Naruto, who didn't particularly enjoy the thought of being a part of a dark guild. How do we get missions now? He asked. The group fell silent once more. We could steal from other guilds? Samui interrupted, rubbing her neck uneasily. Naruto took note of that. I mean, most clients don't know the individual mages of a guild, right? If we steal a mission request and claim to be members of that guild, we can complete said mission and receive payment from the client, and none would be the wiser. Kyo and Deidara nodded their heads in agreement as Naruto considered the idea. It was the best strategy they had yet devised. Naruto said, that's just dumb. We're a guild of mages, not thieves. Samui was reading a heavy book when it slammed into his face. Naruto went on, nonplussed, the book slipping from his face. In any case, we have work to do. The people in this town seem nice, and I'm sure that they'd be more than willing to pay us for some cheap work if we ask nicely. He pointed the finger at Deidara, but no mischief making, and no destruction of any popular town relics either. I don't want to be chased out of this town like we were back in Frisia. You got that? Alright, let's go out fighting. Members of his guild moaned. South of Frisia, which was situated directly at the edge of the vast Azalean desert, was a tiny, prehistoric community known as Azalea Town. It wasn't particularly well liked. Some of the maps actually made no mention of it at all due to its close proximity to Fiore's largest desert. Tourists and travelers generally avoided the area, but they had needed to quickly relocate after their brief fix in Frisia, which was entirely Deidara's fault. Mind you, the closest town had turned out to be Azalea. Yosh! Exclaimed Naruto, wearing clothes appropriate for a sunny day, as he smashed open the guild doors with a straw hat on his head and a lighter orange vest in place of his sage cloak, brown safari shorts, and a basic pair of slippers. He said, let's go. None of his fellow guild members appeared nearly as excited as he did as they filed after him. Are you sure about this, Naruto-sama? Samui asked uneasily as she peered down at the town below the rock formation where their guild had established itself. She was fairly certain that she would never grow accustomed to the concept of a mobile guild. Even though sage magic was amazing, she was occasionally uncomfortable with it. What do you mean? The toad sage asked impatiently. It's a small town at the edge of a desert. Desert, you know. Like in Desert Ed, what could possibly go wrong here? Samui chose not to refute that reasoning. I didn't mean that. I was referring to your condition. However, Naruto dismissed her with indifference, saying, come now, let's go. Lots of people to meet, lots of work to do. It didn't take long to descend the rock. After trudging across the sandy soil that made up the roads, they eventually found themselves in full view of the town. At its very gates, and only then did they get a clear view of the area. If Azalea was good enough to be called a ghost town, it was a ghost town. It looked even more run down and worn out than usual, but it was a perfect replica of those towns you saw in old Western movies. The roads weren't much better, and the houses were mainly wooden shacks that looked like they wouldn't last more than 5 minutes in a sandstorm due to wear and tear from the years. There was not even a soul in sight as far as they could see. Samui let out a sigh. Abandoned. You can rely on Naruto to ruin their journey before it starts. With hesitation, Kyo called out, hello? As he made his way to the town square, his voice resonating off the desolate streets. The streets were deserted. Additionally, the famous bar with the movable doors was deserted. All of the shacks appeared to have had their doors and windows bolted shut. What the fuck is wrong with this place? Deidara growled, already distasteful of the area because of the scorching sun. Kyo chose to move closer to Samui, ignoring him. What do you think happened here? He asked. I haven't really heard much about Azalea in my travels. Has the town always been like this? But Samui's response was equally useless. She muttered, tense, I don't know. A market stall that was deserted but still had some vegetables on its racks caught their attention. Kyo halted his journey to examine a cucumber. In an uneasy tone, he declared, they're all rotted. The group became more tense. Samui looked around her, thinking coolly, this is strange. What might have happened to the residents of the town? All of them were gone. Indeed, she had heard tales of failed magic experiments and the abrupt disappearance of entire populations, but this was the first time she had seen anything that resembled that. Had that been the case? She examined the gloomy windows of the nearby buildings with narrowed eyes. She could have sworn if she had positioned her head precisely over there. Aorg! They all let out a zombie-like yelp. Aorg! Naruto moaned once more as he staggered in their direction, his tongue hanging out of his mouth. The heat, I'm drying up. I'm so gonna die. What do you think you're doing? Samui scolded, Naruto-sama. Naruto cried as he got up from the floor and rubbed the coconut-sized lump that was now protruding from his crown. Was that why you hit me? He asked. Well, you did shock me. Samui sighed, her eyes changing to a worried one. Are you alright? She asked. Yeah, Naruto said, gasping once more as he stumbled to his feet. I'm fine. With a humorous wiggle, he said, just a bit thirsty, nothing to it. Deidara asked, looking at their leader, what's wrong with him? Aur. Naruto moaned once more, nothing's wrong with me, you idiot, just keep going. He started to move once more, but his eyes rolled up in his head. Samui slapped her palm to her forehead and screamed, Naruto-sama, you idiot, Naruto, I knew you shouldn't have come along. Naruto groaned, his tongue all shriveled up and his lips crumpled, whoosh, an idiot. What? What happened to him? Deidara repeated. Kyo sighed and pointed to the shriveled up blonde. Dehydration is one of the drawbacks of being a toad. Sage boss is very prone to heat exhaustion. He loses his mucus layer film under intense dryness and ends up looking like that. But I thought he breathed fire? Deidara said, wrinkling his nose disgustingly. Kyo looked at the man as though his eyebrows were growing funny, as if that clarified everything. He deadpanned. Well, that is fire and this is heat. They started to say, oi, you're not making any sense, but were cut off when Samui started to drag Naruto's near corpse through the sand. Kyo yelled, whoa, hold on. What are you doing, Samui? The blonde remained silent. She took a deep breath after pulling the man all the way up to the entrance of a particularly dilapidated-looking motel. Look, I'm only going to say this once, she said quietly, her words filled with vengeance. I don't know what you lot are doing, but as of right now, our master is in need of help. If this door does not open within the next 3 seconds, I'll take it as an act of war, and set fire to your entire establishment. Samui. Wah. 1. Hey, sis, have you gone crazy? 2. Deidara and Kyo winced. 3. Kyo, fetch me a light, was stated by the woman as she turned on her heels, but they were stopped in their tracks by the sound of approaching footsteps. A weak voice said, please, that would not be necessary, we do not want any trouble. A figure appeared from the alley behind the motel. Her fingers trembled from the tight grip she had on her cane, and she was short and hunched. Her face was wrinkled with age and warty, and her hair, which had once appeared to be a bright red, was now pinkish gray. You do not realize why we are all indoors, right now, she said with an exhausted tone. My name is Chio. I am the town leader. Something is coming, and if we don't get out of the streets now, we are all going to die. Council headquarters. Unknown location. With a frustrated sigh, Lahar strolled down the corridor, reading the reports that had recently arrived from the Rune Knights Naval Division. Only a few days ago, Jellal and Ultir appeared to have been seen with another unnamed Grimoire Heart member, somewhere near the area that was once Tenro Island. However, as is customary, they were all able to avoid capture once more. He was starting to consider the possibility that the Rune Knights might not be as skilled as they had made themselves out to be. He sighed again as he reached his destination and tucked the report into his robes. Bringing bad news wasn't necessary. He knocked a little, waited for no response, and pushed the door open anyhow. The sight of clean floors and white tiles welcomed him right away. Lahar. It was still a little unexpected to find more than a few of these rooms occupied because the council headquarters infirmary section was rarely, if ever, used. He didn't have to ask why, of course. Dorenbolt, how are you doing? Dorenbolt winced, putting a hand to his still bandaged head, and Lahar felt bad for the slight sense of satisfaction that surfaced because, after his misfortunes at Yoshino, the roles were now reversed. Much better, although it is my pride that has taken the worst blow, the man openly stated. I told them I was ready to leave, but they wanted me to wait at least until I could teleport without going dizzy. He breathed a sigh of relief and glanced up at least, tell me you brought some real food. The gruel that the squires keep serving is just plain horrible. Lahar gave a sympathetic grin. The gruel is good for you, it contains calories, minerals and vitamin supplements, just enough to ensure you make a quick recovery. Dorenbolt complained, I knew you'd say that. His statement was followed by an awkward moment of silence. They were both aware that Lahar had a question, but the man with the bespectacles wasn't quite ready to speak. The scarred captain, hating the silence, finally gave in and asked, how are the rest? Shino's still unconscious. Lahar told him. Guy's much better, although he wouldn't be straining his back anytime soon. I'm not sure he is actually concerned about it, though he's already been apprehended twice while attempting to sneak off and run laps around the HQ. And Pakura? Lahar grinned wryly and said, please don't ask, she's having a really bad hair day. Startled that his friend could even joke, Dorenbolt arched an eyebrow instead. Any other casualties? He inquired. A few second-degree burns. Nothing serious. One man might have needed immediate resuscitation, though it seemed he got in the way of Pakura's magic. That's good, Dorenbolt said. Releasing a tension he was unaware he was carrying. He wasn't innocent. He was aware that it would have taken more than a few casualties to apprehend a criminal such as Uzumaki Naruto, but to learn that none of them were deadly? That was fortunate. He started to become agitated when it became clear that Lahar would not speak again, but the rune mage abruptly made an announcement. Do you think that the council is hiding something? What? Began Dorenbolt. That was definitely not what he had anticipated. Do you think that they are hiding something about Uzumaki? Lahar asked, repeating, the council, with a straight face. That's quite unlike you, Lahar. Why would you even think that? Dorenbolt stammered, wow. And it was true, his most noteworthy accomplishment was the failed Tenro incident, but he was typically the one to question the council's decisions, but to discover Lahar doing the same thing as well. Lahar began to cough. I don't know, it's just think about it for a moment. The chairman is investing so many resources into capturing Uzumaki right now. We didn't expend these much resource when all those other dark guilds were running around unchecked. We didn't do so during the whole lullaby incident either. It almost seems as if Uzumaki is being treated as a threat level equaling Zeref himself. He broke into Yoshino, didn't he? And he tried to activate an R system in Era. Dorenbolt stammered, but Jellal did just about the same thing too, replied his companion. Shouldn't that make him on par with Naruto? He then toned down his voice, which also begs the question. The council condemned Uzumaki for attempting to resurrect Zeref. Why would they do that when we all know that Zeref currently lives? Dorenbolt made a feeble argument. Maybe Naruto didn't know. He'd just been in contact with Ultir a few days before the Era affair. He had no reason to be ignorant. The scarred man tried again. Well, what if he was trying to resurrect someone else? Someone just as dangerous? Lahar took a breath. That well may be, but think about it. Dorenbolt, how is it that the magic world had no information of Naruto until he just sprung up about 1 month ago? Dark mages don't just appear out of nowhere. Dorenbolt swallowed his defense. That assessment was partially accurate. There was a history to each dark mage, and they all came from somewhere eventually. It was discovered that Hades of Grimoire Heart was actually Purhito, a former guild master at Fairy Tale Jellal, also known as Sagrain, served on the council following his alleged escape from Zeref's cult, during which he lost his twin brother. Additionally, Horacion Cease's brain had been a deranged scientist who had always enjoyed doing pointless magic tricks. Each of the great dark mage had a history. The question of who Naruto Uzumaki was then raised. Naruto Uzumaki was Sensei's son, Lahar said quietly. We knew Kushina-san died at childbirth, but we never inquired much about the child, did we? Upon Sensei's passing, Jiraiya-sama adopted the boy as his protege and took him on a training journey around the globe. I see, Dorenbolt replied. To decipher who Uzumaki really is, to know where it all went wrong, we'd have to unravel his past and find Jiraiya-sama. He turned to his companion and said, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the council is hiding anything. Lahar, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't trust them. Taking a document out of his robes, Lahar calmly gazed at his friend and said, Jiraiya's last known location was somewhere around the capital of Kylum Kingdom. But that's the territory of the Black Salamander, exclaimed the other captain. Was the territory? Lahar said menacingly. It was painstaking. but some news that the council is withholding managed to reach my ears. The black salamander is no more. Ignoring his friend's expression of pure shock, he continued, "You understand now. Doranbolt, to know more about Naruto Uzumaki, to know anything of how he thinks, we have to start at his last known location." Outside the window, the wind choked. "We have to start in Kylum." In the middle of town, Shio Bazen's house was a dilapidated shack that perfectly reflected the state of the others nearby. As they traveled to the old hag's house, Samui pretended not to notice the many pairs of eyes that peered at them from behind wooden shutters, but she had noticed and was intrigued. She decided to address the issue when Naruto was at least somewhat stable, so she suppressed her curiosity and hurried after Chio. Even as the elderly woman pushed open the door to her house, she cautioned, "I hope this is not a trap." Chio snorted without responding. The woman gestured, "Lay him over here," and then vanished into the commotion without giving them another look. They trailed behind Samui, who winced. The smell of old lady and moldy carpets permeated the entire house, which, when paired with the antique furniture and moth-infested cushions, didn't exactly create a welcoming atmosphere. At least they were no longer in the intense heat, and Kyo was relieved to drop Naruto's lifeless body onto the couch the woman had indicated. The group cast doubtful glances around the house. 50 Jules says that the old bat has gone on to transform into some hideous demon from the books of Zareth and would be coming back here to gobble us all up, said Deidara. "Stop talking, fool," Samui growled. "I'm just saying," replied the creator, "but the first sign of trouble and I'm leaving the leader here. It's his fault. He brought us out to the middle of a desert anyway." "What are you talking about?" Kyo laughed. "If you hadn't destroyed that grotto, we wouldn't have needed to escape from Frisia." "Yeah, but I didn't destroy the grotto, you know, I only redecorated it." Their argument was cut off by the sound of shuffling feet. Chio walked in and peered at them like a hawk. She moved past the anxious group and stood over Naruto, checking his pupils by opening his eyelids. "All right, pardon me," Samui said. "What precisely did you mean when?" Chio interrupted her, saying, "He's dehydrated." "We knew that." Kyo, Deidara, and Samui barked back. As if she hadn't heard them, she went on, "His eyes are unfocused, so he's suffering from mild delirium too. The best is to give him lots of water and hope he gets better by nightfall. The heat should have gone down by then." Deidara was knocked off his feet when she abruptly threw a pail at him. "Blondie. Go fetch me some water from the pot back in the kitchen." "Second Blondie, get over here and light the stove. I need to warm some soup." "The other idiot can make himself useful by barricading the doors and the windows." "You mentioned that something was coming a little while ago. What was it?" Samui asked, watching Chio warily as Deidara started to yell back. Chio wandered over to a nearby cabinet and rummaged through it without responding. Samui went on, "If you have a problem, you can talk to us. We are mages." "And you think that would save you, would it?" Chio growled. "Mages? Bah, my dear, do you have any idea how many mages have passed through this town already? 40? 50? To stop the desert tide, they all say, and yet, not a single one of them has made it back successfully. We are not ordinary mages," Kyo said. "We are members of the Toadstool Guild. If there is a problem, then we can deal with it, and we haven't heard anything about a desert tide either." "Oi, I have no particular intention of helping this old bat," Deidara snarled. "You think you can help, do you?" Chio growled, staring at them. "You think you can stick your noses into business that is no concern of yours? Then why don't you look outside?" With a slight frown, Samui chose to grant Chio's request. She moved to one of the wooden shutters, undid the clasp, and peered through the window. The old hag had started harassing her teammates behind her, telling them to block the doors. Once more Samui's eyes narrowed. She started, "I don't see anything," but then she noticed something. It appeared to have gotten darker outside in the brief time they had been in Chio's house, as though dusk was drawing near and it was hardly noon at all. With icy eyes, she quickly turned to face Chio and said, "It's darker." Kyo came to a halt. Deidara also did. The two asked simultaneously, "What do you mean it's darker?" "When we got here, the townspeople had already barricaded themselves in their homes. They seem to have been in a haste too, leaving some of their goods and wares out in the open. But this isn't a strange phenomenon to you guys, is it? Rather, it seems to be the norm. What is coming?" Samui glared at Chio, concluding that an explanation was finally necessary. Chio said nothing, her features hidden by a dark shadow. "Something has been going on in this town," said Samui, "an occurrence that has been happening for far too long. The sorry state of your houses and crops are a dead giveaway. I agree that it is none of our concern, but you have no reason to hide it from us any longer. What is coming?" They all felt a slight tremor beneath their feet as the ground shook at that precise moment. Now that it was dark enough, they could see it from inside the house. With a weary sigh, Chio collapsed onto a couch, appearing even more frail than before. She said in a low voice, "I never said I wasn't going to tell you. Brat, every once in a while, whenever the clock strikes 12, the sand moves." She paused and scowled miserably, making herself appear twice as old. It was unnoticeable at first, nothing too serious. Little grains of sand would move in sync with one another. However, over time, the sand has increased in strength. We used to be more than this, you know? A lot has been lost now. Every day, when it is noon, the sand rises in the desert so high it can sometimes blot out the sun, and then, when it recedes, anything within its reach that isn't safely bolted down is dragged back to Azalea with it. You wanted to know what was coming? Well, that is what is coming, brat, the desert itself. The Toadstool Guild members stared at her in disbelief. That's not possible, Kyo replied. At least, if it was, it can't be a natural occurrence. Is the desert alive or something, old hag? Samui remained silent and kept her gaze fixed on Chio. The elderly woman reciprocated, looking back at her with a defiant expression. Samui suddenly realized, "You were a mage. Did you honestly think your magic would work on me, girl?" Chio demanded with rage. "Don't make me laugh. I've seen much stronger telepaths during my time." Samui asked, "Then why do you hate mages?" A million things appeared to flash through Chio's eyes at once, but the tiny house shook violently before she could say another word. Didera swore. "What the?" Chio glared at the three mages once more, saying, "I thought I told you to barricade the doors. Why haven't you done so yet?" From her seat on the couch, "It is coming," she warned, the desert tide. Suddenly eager to force the single entrance closed, Kyo and Didera hurried to the front. Samui repeated, "Why are we wedging those doors?" While continuing to look at Chio. "Isn't it just sand?" she asked. The blonde girl scowled when Chio failed to respond. From his position close by, Didera called out, "Hey, hold on, sis," attempting to force the open window shutter shut. I think there's someone outside." Chio's eyes widened as she gasped, "What?" and broke her gaze with Samui. Kyo replied, peering through the windows as well, "Yeah, he's right, but there's more than one of them." "No, it can't be," Chio said with a sigh. "All of the townspeople know. They won't walk out at noon. The desert will have them." "Maybe they are not townspeople," Kyo thought. "We arrived at this town by chance. You know, seriously, you guys should have a notice board put out or some other kind of warning, because this is a pretty fucked up ordeal for a traveler to happen unto. Not that it is our problem anyway." But Samui gasped a little next to him. "There's a child outside, Kyo. We have to help them." "A child?" Once more, the building rumbled. "Kyo, we have to help them." "Wait, what? You can't be serious." However, Samui was already heading for the doors. "Samui, wait," outside, a sandstorm had already started to build. Samui had to protect her eyes from the gritted wind of sand even as she kicked the doors open and hurried out of it. There was no sign of the sun. Rather, the day appeared to be closer to mid-evening or, depending on your perspective, early morning. The blonde mage was uncomfortable, but she didn't even bother to glance back at the desert. She most definitely did not want to know what was behind her. "You idiots! Get over here!" She had called out to a group of 4, but they were clearly not listening to her as they stumbled around in the storm. Sand flew into her eyes as the wind increased. The earth moved once more even as Samui charged ahead. She felt her heart sink into her stomach. She didn't think Chio's shack would be able to withstand whatever was planned for next if the storm continued at this rate. "You idiots, over here," she once more requested. With a whisper, someone landed next to her, Reducio. The sandstorm faltered. Her eyes were no longer attacked by the wind. Samui removed her arm from her face to look at Kyo, who was now kneeling beside her with his left fist pressed into his right palm and his index finger pointing downward. The opposite gesture of what he typically did. She saw that a wide area magic seal had developed on the ground surrounding her as she looked down at her feet. "I'm not sure it'll be up to a minute though," Kyo said with a painful grimace as he struggled to lessen the storm's strength in their immediate area. "That would be enough," she said. She ran toward the group, occasionally yelling as she braved the gritty shower once more. "Oi, you goddamn fools! Look this way." One of them, a man with reddish-orange hair pulled back in a ponytail, looked up. A woman with flowing green hair and a seductive figure who had no business trekking through a desert. He smiled as he saw her and pushed one of his friends. A man with spiky black hair stood to their right and behind them, frantically attempting to protect the child she had seen earlier from the dangerous storm. Samui blinked abruptly. The orange-haired man appeared in front of her, grinning deceptively. "Hey there, beautiful, you need some help?" When Samui glared at him, the man became noticeably pale and shied away from her. "You fucking idiots. Do you have any inch of sense? Get that kid out of the sands and come with me now, something's coming." The man looked suddenly very serious as he scowled at her. How do we know we can? Now, she growled after taking a deep breath. He left to talk with his group. He returned in a matter of seconds, carrying the young child shamelessly beneath his arm. He nodded and said, "Lead the way." Samui turned suddenly and was about to dash back to the old hag's house when he went pale with shock. Something was simmering in the distance while they had been indoors. The entire desert appeared to have come to life, churning and twisting in on itself. The sun was obscured by the dunes in the distant desert, which had grown to incredible heights, and what appeared to be an enormous sand abyss was speeding toward them. When the man beside her saw it, he too turned pale and nearly dropped his sword in disbelief. Samui shouted, "Kyo, move!" and hurried over to her partner. Kyo remained kneeling beside Chio's house, looking ridiculously pale as he fought covertly against the storm's increasing intensity. The man with the orange hair arrived at the shack first, racing through Chio's door at almost machine speed. Next to arrive was Samui, who stepped aside to let a tired Kyo in first before turning around and glaring at the other two who were trailing behind. "Hurry up, quickly!" However, it appeared that the man with the spiky hair had been hurt before they arrived. All Samui could do was assist the green-haired woman in getting the man through the door as she struggled under his weight, but just as she tried to trail behind them, Kyo stammered, "Samui, get in here. We have to bolt the door." The blonde cast her gaze to her feet. Her leg had become lodged in the sand. She pulled desperately to free it, only to discover after the fact that something had apparently caught hold of it under the sand. Her senses were alerted by speeding noises, and she turned, gasping in disbelief as she saw what appeared to be thousands of snake-like tendrils of sand speeding toward the town, grabbing and clinging to anything they could find. "You idiots, what are you standing around for? Get that door shut." Samui scowled after giving Kyo one glance. With more than a small burst of telekinesis, she slammed Chio's house shut. Then, she felt a strong force pull the sand back, dragging her, screaming, back towards the desert.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.